On a quiet street with neat lawns, one porch light stayed on past 10. That was the minute the other trick-or-treaters came, the ones who do not go home. Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight begins a set of 5 true Halloween night hauntings. First up is the rule most neighbors never break. Porch lights off at 10. One house forgot. What waited outside was not after candy. It was after whoever kept the door open. He moved in 2 weeks before Halloween, still living out of boxes, still learning the names of the streets. The cul-de-sac looked friendly in the day. Neighbors waved from rakes. A thin line of maples stood red and gold, leaves sticking to the blacktop like wet paper coins. Everyone talked about the rule in the same careful tone. Lights off at 10, curtains closed, no late knocks. He nodded along and laughed inside, because rules like that felt like small-town theater, a way to pass stories down and keep kids in bed. On Halloween he worked late, then rushed home with a bag of mixed candy. He kept the porch bulb on to be kind. He liked the warm circle it made on the steps, the safe glow, the way it turned the cold air to honey. Kids came and went, masks squeaking, plastic bags whispering. He heard leaves crunch and the soft clink of costume beads. By 9:50, the flow slowed. By 10, the street fell quiet. He stood inside with the door cracked, watching the last few families trail away. He held the bowl, felt the weight lighten, smelled chocolate and cheap dye on his skin. At 10:01, a light wind shifted through the maples. He noticed because the air changed smell like damp smoke far off. The porch bulb hummed a little, brighter than before, and the glass went hot to the touch. He set the bowl on a box and rubbed his fingers. When he looked back through the cracked door, a second line of trick-or-treaters had formed at the bottom step. 5 small figures, still as photographs, each holding a sack that looked like flour bags from an old kitchen. Their costumes were neat but wrong, like a school play from a slower decade. A cowboy with a cardboard star, a witch with a felt hat too stiff, a nurse with bright white stockings and shoes older than the neighborhood. The last was a boy in a paper mask, eye holes too wide, the edges browned from breath. He felt relief first. More kids, a chance to give out the last handfuls. He opened the door wide. The smell of damp smoke grew stronger. It slid along the hallway floor like fog you only saw out of the corner of your eye. He held out the bowl. Each child lifted the mouth of their sack, and the dark inside looked deeper than any bag should. He dropped 3 minibars into the nurse's sack. The candy fell with soft clicks, then no sound at all. It did not land. He told himself they were cushioned against other pieces, but the bowl was almost empty. He tried again with the cowboy. The bars fell and kept falling, as if a stairwell yawned in there, as if the bag belonged to some bottom that did not live in his world. The boy in the paper mask tapped his wrist where a watch should be. The cardboard star on the cowboy's chest ticked once, like something cooling. Behind the 5, shapes gathered in the street. He saw them between the thin trunks of the maples. Tall and narrow, their edges wavered like heat above a grill. Their eyes were bright round points, the same color as his porch bulb. He backed up and shut the door to a hand's width. The bulb hummed harder. An old smell rose from the ceiling, tar and attic dust, sun-baked shingles, hot rope. He reached up to twist the porch light off at last, but the glass scalded his palm. He let go with a hiss and felt silly for the small pain. He could grab a glove. He dug in a box near the hallway for winter stuff, mittens, a scarf. Beneath them lay a single heavy glove he didn't recognize, dark and sticky to the touch, as if soaked in something long dried. When he slid his hand inside, it fit better than his own skin. He opened the door to the width of his shoulder and tried the bulb again. The glove took the heat. The glass turned under his fingers and didn't move. The fixture resisted like a locked jar. The boy in the paper mask tilted his head in a smooth, bird-like motion. The nurse's sack sagged a little toward his house, as if pulled by a breath from his hallway. He thought of the neighbors and their calm faces, the way they spoke like people who owed something and paid it each year. A boundary street, they had said. A door you keep closed after 10. People keep lights for people. Other things use whatever people build. The tall shapes slid closer. Their eyes burned like bright beads. He could not see feet or hands, only height and a waver, as if the air had been hung on sticks and lit from inside by a bulb. His breath fogged the glass storm door. The porch stepped light to heavy like weight tested one plank at a time. He pictured the houses around him like islands. Each had a porch, each had a bulb. He understood then that the rule was not about one light, but all of them. It was a circuit. One open door on a boundary was nothing. Many open doors were a street. The glove in his hand felt heavier, and he knew this glove had made this circuit before. He knew someone had walked lawn to lawn one Halloween, turning off what would not turn itself, and that person had not come back to pick up the glove. He stepped out and shut the door behind him. The night carried a thin ash taste. Leaves stuck to his shoes like tongues. The 5 small figures watched, but they did not climb the steps. They opened their sacks wider, mouths of canvas stretching farther than seams should stretch. The tall shapes paused at the curb, heads cocked toward his bulb, then toward the next. He ran to his neighbor's porch. The bulb there burned steady, though he could swear he had seen it wink out at 10. He twisted it with the glove. It turned without heat. The glass whispered under his palm like breath on a bottle. The yard light far down the street blinked out as if answering. He moved to the next, heart pounding, counting steps, counting bulbs. Each turn felt like shutting a lid on a small, hot mouth. The air cooled just a little each time. Behind him, the 5 small figures turned in unison to face whichever house he was at. Their sacks stayed open. The boy in the paper mask would tap his wrist, once for each minute past 10, and the tap would echo in the wood underfoot. From the street, the tall shapes drifted along the curb, their bright eyes moving like porch lights carried by people he could not remember. At the 8th house, a string of small white bulbs wrapped a porch rail, hung by a kind neighbor who meant well. He crushed each one with the glove, glass popping like dry knuckles. The tiny lights died in a row. The tall shapes stopped and seemed to thin. The ash taste pulled back. He kept moving. He thought of his baby asleep in the back room, a cheap whale nightlight glowing blue above the crib. He thought of the hallway lamp he sometimes forgot. He thought of the switch by the window that stuck and sometimes flickered on if you slammed the bedroom door. The glove had weight like a duty. He counted and tried to keep his mind flat and blank, so no thought would call anything by accident. At the last house, the porch bulb was already dark. He felt brief relief, then noticed a soft glow upstairs behind a thin shade, a small circle of light like a coin. He knew that window. It matched his house. He had never put a bulb there. He had not unpacked a lamp for that room. He ran, glove held to his chest, wind cold enough to burn his teeth. The 5 small figures stood now at his bottom step, lined up again, sacks open, cloth-like mouths held by patient hands. The hum from his porch had grown into a low note that vibrated his bones. The tall shapes leaned inward, drawn by that note, not quite stepping into the yard, as if the grass itself had rules they could not break. He pushed through them, moved up the steps, and set his shoulder to the door. It gave like skin, not wood. The hallway smelled of tar, attic dust, and old rope. The glove stuck to the knob, then freed. He went to the back room. The small blue whale nightlight glowed harmless, but the overhead ceiling bulb burned bright white on its own. He had not turned it on. The pull chain lay stiff and straight, tugged by nothing. He reached up. The glove met the glass. Heat buzzed against his palm. He turned. The bulb held. He tried again, harder, and felt the glass give a fraction. From the hall, the ash smell darkened. He imagined the tall shapes lifting their heads. He thought of the boundary and the way doors work both ways. He twisted harder. The bulb turned at last. It clicked, went dark, then kept turning loose in its socket like a thing without threads. The hum in the house sank. The blue whale's glow looked honest again, small and gentle. The ash smell thinned until the room held only baby powder and paint. He stood there with his hand up, breathing fast, gloves sticky, skin sweating under it. He went back to the front door. The porch stood empty. The walkway lay clean except for a few leaves shaped like hands. The street looked normal, a little fog on the edges, a car far off. He peeled the glove and set it on the hall table. His palm underneath was white and wrinkled from sweat. For 3 days the house stayed calm. The baby slept well. The porch bulb cooled and dimmed. He told himself he had been caught up in the story the neighbors told and had acted it out like a play. On the 4th day, while making coffee, he looked up at the ceiling bulb in the back room. It was off. Inside the glass something moved, slow as a fish in a jar. Not dust, not a bug. A soft, swirling dark, flecked with specks like embers, turning and turning on its own, as if the bulb remembered heat and would never let go. That was porch lights off at 10, and the rule is simple now: lights out, doors closed, hearts quiet. Some streets are more than streets on Halloween night. If you've ever lived where the rules were not written but everyone knew them, tell us where you're listening from in the comments. If this story stole your breath for a moment, tap like and subscribe to join us for the next haunting in this Halloween series. A woman needed a last-minute Halloween costume. The thrift store had one left, sealed in a dry cleaning bag labeled "Return by Dawn." Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight's tale is the second in our Halloween series, a story about a borrowed costume that never really left its first owner. Some clothes hold warmth, others hold memory. This one held something that still wanted its curtain call. The store was closing early for Halloween, lights already dimmed to half. A few decorations hung lazy in the window, a paper bat with one wing torn, a jack-o'-lantern grin cut from faded cardboard. At the back near the coats, a single garment bag leaned against the wall. The tag tied to the zipper said, "Return by dawn." Maya was late to a party and desperate. She'd tried 2 other stores, everything good was gone. The clerk at the counter looked up once, opened his mouth like to warn her, then just sighed. She offered a 20, got no change, and hurried out with the bag. The plastic smelled of smoke and something sweet underneath, like wilted carnations. In her apartment, she unzipped it. Inside hung a clown suit made of heavy fabric stitched with red X's across the seams, a cracked porcelain mask with painted tears, and old shoes whose soles breathed air instead of squeaking. She told herself it was cool in a creepy way, vintage. But when she looked closely, the inside tag had no size or brand, just a name written in black thread: Pierrot's Return. The suit slid over her skin like water. It fit too well. The mask strap was stiff, the porcelain faintly warm, as if it had been worn moments ago. When she turned to the mirror, her reflection looked delayed by a blink. Out on the street, kids still wandered, shouting through the early dark. She walked toward the party a few blocks away. Streetlights blinked out one by one behind her. The smell of burnt leaves followed. Children stopped their candy runs to stare. One small boy in a skeleton mask tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered. The clown came back. At the party, the music died the second she stepped through the door. A few guests laughed nervously. Someone joked that her costume looked too real. She tried to laugh, but the mask wouldn't let her cheeks move. She danced a little to ease the mood, but each step made the old shoes breathe out with a soft sigh, as if something inside them exhaled. Near midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're late for the show. Gym doors are open." The address was the old elementary school across town, the one that burned decades ago and never reopened. She stared, pulse thudding. A prank, she thought. Someone must have seen her costume and wanted to mess with her. But her feet had other plans. The shoes turned her body without her help. The laughter from the party dulled behind her, swallowed by the night. The gym doors were open when she arrived. The lock hung melted, metal fused like wax. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of paper and mildew. Folding chairs faced a small stage where a paper banner sagged, "Halloween program. Do not start late." A single spotlight snapped on, blue and weak. Programs lay on every chair. She picked one up. Each page listed acts by children, their names blurred by heat marks. At the bottom, someone had scrawled in pencil, "Show must go on, no matter who wears the suit." A soft clapping began behind her. She turned. Rows of children sat in the chairs, skin grey-pale, eyes glossy. Their hands clapped in perfect rhythm, each sound a dry slap of paper. The costume pulled at her joints. The shoes walked her forward. On stage, she began to perform, though she didn't know how. The suit did. It made her bow spin, juggle invisible props. The crowd giggled, a thin, echoing sound like air escaping a balloon. Each move she made burned her muscles, but the laughter made the air grow warmer, the shadows redder. Then the program called for the final act. Volunteers trick. A voice from the crowd said, "I'll go." It was the thrift store clerk. He walked up the aisle, older than she'd first thought, eyes wet. In his trembling hand, he held another garment bag. "You brought it back," he whispered. "Maybe now I can leave." The stage lights flickered. The mask on her face grew hot enough to burn. She tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. The clerk stepped beside her and opened his bag. Inside was another Pierrot suit, torn, blood-stained, half-burned. He looked at the crowd. "We left before the last bow," he said. "They never got their applause." The ghostly audience stood as one, their mouths opening but no sound came, only the smell of smoke and melted glue. The clerk handed her a set of white gloves. "One last trick," he said. "Make them disappear." The gloves clung to her fingers. She lifted her hands without meaning to. When she snapped her fingers, the blue light burst into 100 sparks. The children flickered and vanished, replaced by rows of empty chairs. The stage curtain fell in slow motion, dust floating like ash. When she came to, dawn was bleeding pale light through the gym windows. The clerk was gone. The costume hung loosely now, colder than ice. She stripped it off and stuffed it back into the dry cleaning bag. The label still read, "Return by dawn." She dropped it at the thrift store door and walked home barefoot. That afternoon, she noticed red X's blooming under the skin along her arms, as if stitched from the inside. She ran to the mirror. The marks formed the same pattern as the clown suit's seams. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message read, "Received. See you next Halloween. Don't forget to bring the next one." When she looked down, the bag she'd left at the store sat neatly by her front door. Inside was the suit, clean, pressed and warm. That was the borrowed costume. Some things don't want to be thrown away, they want to be worn again. If you ever find a label that says, "Return by dawn," maybe leave it sealed. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. And if you're brave enough to hear the next haunting, like and subscribe to the Black Hour Stories. A rideshare driver turned on his radio to stay awake. The station that answered back wasn't on any frequency map, but it knew his name, his car, and every road he'd ever taken. Welcome back to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight's ride takes a detour into something that never shows up on GPS, a frequency only drivers hear on Halloween night. The ones who tune in call it Station 1031. Few remember what plays after the static ends. Evan drove nights for extra cash. Halloween was easy money. Bar hoppers, costumes, too much candy and beer. Around midnight, his car smelled like fog machine and cheap perfume. He kept the radio low, a talk station murmuring about local curfews. At 1:13 a.m., the dial slid on its own, a scratch of static, then a voice came through, calm, too close, as if the speaker sat in his back seat. "Good evening, drivers. You're tuned to 1031, the station that keeps you company between here and the next place." He frowned and checked the frequency, 103.1, though that channel was usually dead air. A soft hum underscored the voice, deep enough to feel through the steering wheel. The host chuckled. "We're taking call-ins tonight. Tell us who you left behind on the road." He laughed nervously and switched stations. The dial snapped back. "Evan," the voice said, "you still with us?" His fingers froze. He hadn't given his name. The rideshare app on his phone buzzed. New pickup request, 5 minutes away. No address, just a pin dropped near the old bypass. The rider's note read, "Thanks for listening to 1031. Don't be late." Evan cursed but accepted the fare. The night outside looked fine, a little fog, empty streets. The radio stayed quiet until he turned off the main road. Then the hum rose again, and callers began to speak between static bursts. Each voice told a short story. A crash on a bridge, a woman hit while changing a tire, a boy who disappeared near mile marker 8. Every story ended the same way. He left them behind. The pickup point was a bus stop with no sign, just a cracked bench and wet leaves piled against the curb. A woman stood there in a silver dress soaked through, hair plastered to her cheeks. She smiled when he rolled down the window. "Station sent you?" she asked. Her voice was faint, as if it traveled from far away. He hesitated, then unlocked the door. She climbed in without a word, shivering though the air wasn't cold. Her destination, the old drive-in, a place shut down 20 years ago. The car felt heavier with her inside, the windows fogged in thin, slow circles, as though someone outside breathed on the glass. The radio whispered under the engine noise. "Caller 2, said the host. "Tonight's passenger has been waiting for her ride since 97. Evan gripped the wheel tighter. "This is some prank," he muttered. The woman turned toward him. "Do you remember the gate you hit?" He blinked. There had been a gate. One Halloween night long ago, he and friends had been drunk driving near that very field. A girl had run across the road, or maybe it was a reflection, a trick of the lights. The memory blurred. The radio crackled again. "Don't fight the route, Evan. The road knows you." Street signs changed as he passed. Black letters smeared, names melting into numbers. Each one matched the crash stories from the callers. He looked at his phone for directions. The screen glowed blank white, except for a small red line drawing itself ahead of him, looping through nowhere. At 2:06 a.m., the woman in silver spoke for the first time since. "He promised to take me home," she whispered, "but he left me in the fog." He slammed the brakes. The car stopped in the middle of a field that shouldn't exist. No drive-in screen, just rows of old cars half buried in grass. Their headlights glowed dim orange, engines silent. Frost covered every windshield. The host spoke again, voice trembling with excitement. "Welcome to our lot, listeners. Here every driver gets a second chance. All he has to do is open the trunk." The trunk light flicked on by itself. He could see it glowing in the rearview mirror. The hum in the radio deepened until it felt like a heartbeat under the car. He got out. The field smelled of oil and wet dirt. He opened the trunk. Inside lay his spare tire, and all 5 seatbelts stretched out like grey tongues, twitching. The woman appeared behind him. "If you drive us tonight," she said, "you can undo it. No one has to remember." Her eyes reflected the dashlights, bright and empty. Evan stepped back. "You're not real." The hum rose to a shriek. The radio inside his car burst with voices, dozens layered over one another, every caller speaking at once, saying his full name, his address, and then a final line. He left them behind. The headlights of the buried cars flared. Silhouettes sat in the driver's seats, motionless. When he looked closer, they were grinning wide and wrong, mouths full of dark. He ran back to his own car. The woman sat in the back seat now, dripping water onto the floor mats. The radio whispered softly, "Choice time, driver. Keep the engine running, or shut it off and listen to us forever." He turned the key. The car died. The hum vanished. When he looked up again, the passenger seat was empty. The field stretched quiet around him. No cars, no fog, just still air. His phone restarted, the map blinking back to life, showing a straight road home. He drove in silence, but as the sky lightened toward dawn, he noticed water seeping from the seams of the back seat. He turned the radio off, but it kept faintly glowing. A man's voice, barely a whisper, said, "Tank's full. Same time next year." He sold the car a month later. The new owner sent him a text the following Halloween. "Radio turns on by itself. Keep saying my name." "Should I change the frequency?" Evan never replied. He didn't own a car anymore. He took the bus now, and every time the driver's radio fuzzed, he looked away. That was station 1031. Some roads don't end. They loop back until someone finally pays their fare. If you've ever heard static that seemed to breathe your name, tell us where you're listening from in the comments. And keep the lights on, or better yet, keep them off. And subscribe for the next story from the Black Hour Stories. Every Halloween, the corner grocery left out a glass bowl of free candy. But the wrappers weren't normal. They came numbered, and the numbers never stopped counting. Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Our fourth Halloween tale takes place in a small town that never skips trick-or-treat night, no matter the weather, no matter who goes missing. At the center of it all sits one old candy bowl, filled fresh every year, waiting for anyone greedy enough to take more than one. The grocery store sat at the only four-way stop in town. Its lights stayed on through every storm. Even the year lightning struck the steeple across the street. Every Halloween, the owner, Mr. Delaney, set a heavy glass bowl on the counter right by the register. A handwritten sign above it read, "Take one, count carefully." Nobody remembered when the tradition started, only that it was older than Delaney himself. The candy inside looked ordinary, foil-wrapped caramels, orange taffies, peanut chews, but the wrappers felt odd, smooth outside, waxy inside, as if lined with candle grease. The town kid said if you took more than one, you'd start seeing your number everywhere before sunrise. Of course, rules like that exist, so someone will break them. That year, 5 teenagers did. They were the kind who thought everything spooky was fake until proven otherwise. They stopped by the store before their party, laughing, pockets full of dollar bills for soda and chips. The youngest, Troy, was dared to grab a handful. He scooped up 7 pieces and winked at the others. "Count carefully," the cashier said softly without looking up. Troy snorted and paid for a soda. The bowl trembled slightly when he walked away, but he didn't notice. Outside, the air smelled like wet hay and cold rain. The group tore open the candy under the streetlight. Each wrapper had a small brown number written inside, neat and old-fashioned, like from a fountain pen. Troy laughed until he saw the duplicate. The others teased him, saying it was just random ink. They tossed their wrappers into the gutter and walked on toward the edge of town, the sound of their boots crunching leaves. At first, the night stayed normal. Distant fireworks, porch lights winking off, the smell of wood smoke. Then the numbers started following them. The first appeared at the gas station, pump 8 flickering. Then the bus stop clock read 8:08 even though the bus was hours gone. By the time they reached the old water tower, Troy's phone battery was at 8%. He joked about it, but his voice trembled. The group noticed how quiet the town felt. Even the wind seemed to pause between breaths. They decided to walk back to the store, laughing too loudly to cover their nerves. When they passed the church, the marquee out front glowed with new letters. "Count again, 8 remain." Nobody spoke after that. At the store, the windows were dark, though the open sign still buzzed. Inside, the candy bowl sat empty. The glass was warm, fogged from the inside. Behind the counter, Mr. Delaney stood perfectly still. His eyes followed them, slow and ticking like a clock's second hand. "Too many sweets?" he asked. His voice was dry, papery. "We just, wanted to put them back," Troy said, holding out the empty wrappers. Mr. Delaney tilted his head. "You can't return what's already been counted." The lights flickered. On the wall behind him hung an old ledger, pages covered in columns of numbers. The ink shimmered like dried syrup. Each line ended with a name the teens didn't recognize, except the newest one, Troy Vance, 8. Mr. Delaney's smile widened until it didn't look human anymore. His jaw clicked with each word. Someone must balance the count before dawn. Troy dropped the wrappers. They fluttered to the floor but didn't land. They just kept falling, shrinking into the dark between the tiles. The others ran. Troy froze as the air turned heavy and sweet, thick with the smell of caramel cooking too long. He could feel something forming in his palm, a new piece of candy, wrapped tight, hot enough to burn. The waxy paper bore a fresh number. 7. His friends found him outside minutes later, standing under the flickering streetlight, eyes open, body stiff. The candy sat in his palm, unbitten. They tried to wake him. He was breathing but shallow, whispering under his breath, "Count again, count again." When the police came, Mr. Delaney was gone. The store was locked from the inside, lights out, shelves empty. The next day, the bowl was back on the counter, filled to the brim. The new sign said, "Take one, payment cleared." Troy never spoke again, but he kept one strange habit. Every Halloween after, he returned to the store at closing time, dropped a single wrapped candy in the bowl, and walked home. People said he counted the steps the whole way. If anyone interrupted, he started over. No one else ever dared to take more than one, but every few years, someone new moves to town, ignores the stories and laughs at the sign, and by morning another number joins the ledger. That was the candy that counts. Some debts come in coins, others in wrappers. If you ever see a candy bowl with numbers on the inside, don't test your luck. Take one and walk away. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments, and if you want more true Halloween hauntings, like and subscribe to the Black Hour Stories. When the elevator stopped between floors at midnight, she thought it was just a glitch. But the mirrored hallway she stepped into didn't belong to her building or her world. Welcome back to the Black Hour Stories. Our final Halloween haunting takes us high above the city to a new apartment tower that hides an old secret behind its mirrors. Some residents say you can still reach the 13th floor if you press the right buttons after midnight. The ones who tried never rode the elevator again. The Maple Crest Towers were barely 6 months old. Glass walls, marble lobby, an elevator that whispered its floors instead of dinging. No one living there believed in ghosts, except maybe the maintenance man. He was quiet, gray-haired, always humming something that sounded like a hymn. One October afternoon, while fixing a light near the mailboxes, he told the new tenant, Dana, "Never press 1-4 at the same time as close door after midnight. The car don't like that." She laughed. "There isn't even a 13th floor." He stopped humming. "That's what they want you to think." On Halloween night, The building threw a rooftop party. Dana almost didn't go, too tired, too cold, but the invitation had said midnight champagne, and her friends were already upstairs. She put on a white sheet ghost costume as a joke and took the elevator alone. The mirrored doors closed around her reflection. She could hear the faint echo of music from above, bass thumping through the cables. The floor panel glowed warm gold. Just before she pressed rooftop, the car jolted, soft like a breath. The panel blinked twice. The number 12 glowed, then 14, then back to 12. She frowned, sighed, and pressed close door and 1 together, hoping to reset it. The elevator shuddered once, then went still. All the lights died except one, the number 13, faint and pulsing red. "Okay," she muttered. "We're doing this." When the doors slid open, the hallway waiting for her was colder than it should have been. The carpet was the same pattern as her floor, but off somehow. The flowers were different shapes, mirrored backward. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and smoke. Along the wall stretched a long mirror, the kind she'd passed 100 times in the lobby. Except this one breathed. A thin fog pulsed behind the glass, like someone on the other side exhaling. Her reflection stood half a beat slower than she did. When she tilted her head, it followed, but late. A shiver ran down her arms. "Okay," she whispered. "It's a trick mirror." Then something moved behind her reflection, another figure under a white sheet a few steps back. She spun around. The hallway behind her was empty. When she looked again, the reflection figure was gone, but the mirror had grown cloudy, rippling slightly like water in a storm drain. Down the hall, fluorescent lights flickered in a slow rhythm. 3 flashes, paused, 3 flashes. At the end of the corridor, a janitor's cart stood by itself, one wheel squeaking in triplets. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. A sign above the nearest door read, "Stair access." But the handle was cold metal that stung her palm like ice held too long. She pulled anyway. The door didn't budge. She turned toward the elevator, only to see her reflection still facing the door. Then it smiled she hadn't. A faint tapping started, soft knocks from inside the mirror, steady and slow. Each tap came from a different spot, like fingertips testing glass. Her reflection tilted its head, its grin too wide now, the sheet slipping off to reveal her own face rearranged, eyes where her mouth should be, mouth stretched where her throat ought to be. She stumbled back, slamming into the elevator button panel. Every button lit at once. The doors closed, but only halfway, sticking on something soft. A hand, her own, pale and backward, reaching through from the mirror side. Dana screamed and jammed the door close button, but the elevator refused to move. Her handprint smeared across the metal, not hers, left-handed. The mirror began to slide down the hallway wall, dragging light with it, leaving wet streaks that steamed in the cold air. Behind the glass walked more figures, all under sheets, faces white and blurry. Some carried broken cell phones that flashed like candles. Each had a plastic wristband, hospital red. One by one they turned their heads toward her, movements delayed but perfect. The lights dimmed. The elevator display blinked nonsense. 12, 12, 12, 12, 12. Dana pressed rooftop again. The doors closed at last. She dropped to her knees, gasping. The elevator rose, groaning like something underwater. When it opened, she was back in the lobby. Music drifted faintly from above, muffled and cheerful. The night guard waved. "Happy Halloween," he said. Her sheet costume still covered her face. She didn't speak. She walked straight to her apartment and locked the door. At sunrise, neighbors swore they saw her leave the building, still wearing the sheet, carrying a small mirror under her arm. She never came back. That night, the maintenance man cleaned the elevator. On the panel, every number worked fine except 13, which flickered softly no matter what he did. He covered it with black tape. A few days later, residents started complaining about strange noises, footsteps between the 12th and 14th floors, and faint knocks on their bathroom mirrors around 12:03 a.m. One tenant filmed it. Her reflection hesitated for a second before smiling back even after she'd stopped. In the video's playback, something could be seen walking behind her reflection. Someone draped in a white sheet, moving one heartbeat late. The management company replaced every mirror in the building. Still, tenants say on Halloween night, if you ride the elevator after midnight and the light flickers red, you'll feel the air turn colder, and somewhere down that missing hallway, you'll hear the faint rhythm of a janitor's cart. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That was midnight behind the mirror. Some reflections don't copy you. They wait for their turn to walk out. If you've ever seen your mirror lag or felt watched while brushing your teeth at night, tell us where you're listening from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true hauntings from the Black Hour stories. Welcome to the Black Hour stories, where true places and terrible endings meet. Tonight's tale begins with a 5-star home that looked perfect on the screen, but one guest found out too late that some listings come with more than hidden fees. The old farmhouse on Hollow Bridge Road looked peaceful in the photos. Soft lighting, white curtains, and a wraparound porch under thick oak trees. Lauren booked it for a weekend alone to finish some freelance work. The owner's messages were polite, almost too polite, and the price was lower than it should have been. She figured she'd gotten lucky. When she arrived, the house stood deep off the road, half hidden by brush. The air smelled damp like rain and old wood. The lockbox code worked fine, and the front door creaked open slow, heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. Inside, the air was cold, even though the thermostat read 72. The place was spotless, a little too spotless. The furniture looked unused, the bed too neatly tucked. But the strangest thing was a guest book on the coffee table, old-fashioned, with a pen tied to the spine by twine. A note on the first page said, "Every guest must sign before their stay is complete." She thought it was cute. She flipped through a few pages, all blank. By dusk, Lauren was in bed working when she heard it, a steady knocking from downstairs. Not the door, but something inside the house. She went to check, thinking maybe the plumbing. The sound stopped when she stepped off the last stair. She walked through the kitchen, the living room, then back toward the front door. Nothing, but when she turned to go back upstairs, the guest book was open on the table again. Her pen sat beside it. The next knock came from the wall beside her, louder this time. The whole frame of the house seemed to groan. Lauren told herself it was the wind, but the air outside had gone still. No branches moved. She decided to leave the lights on and sleep, but every time she drifted off, she heard someone walking on the porch, slow steps, heel, then toe. The boards creaked under a weight that wasn't there. At 2:43 a.m., the motion light outside flashed on. She looked out the window and saw a shape standing by the oak tree, not moving, not breathing. The light went out again, and when it came back on, the shape was gone. In the morning, she packed up early. She didn't sign the book, she just wanted to go. But when she reached the front door, she saw muddy footprints leading from the porch into the kitchen, bare feet too long, toes dragging like someone had been pulled. Her phone buzzed with a message from the host. "Please don't leave without signing the guest book." Lauren froze. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. The knock started again, hard this time, from behind her. She turned slowly. The book lay open on the table. Her name was already written on the last page, shaky, smeared like someone had signed for her. She dropped her keys, ran out the door, and didn't stop driving until she hit the interstate. Weeks later, the listing disappeared from Airbnb. A new one popped up nearby under a different name, same photos, same porch, same curtains. And in the single review that appeared under it, the guest had written, "Signed the book, can't leave now." The first story spread around travel forums for months, but it wasn't the only one. Another guest, this time a couple, had their own stay go wrong in a different state, one that never made the news but left behind something darker. Ethan and Riley had been on the road for a week, driving cross-country after graduation. They were tired, broke, and sick of cheap motels. When they found a cozy-looking basement suite on Airbnb for $40 a night, they thought they'd scored a deal. The listing showed brick walls, a tidy kitchenette, and a cheerful note from the host. "I live upstairs if you need anything." The reviews were all 5 stars, each one short and vague. "Nice stay. Would book again." When they arrived, a grey-haired woman opened the door before they could knock. Her smile was wide but somehow wrong. Her voice was soft and flat as she handed them the keys. "You'll hear me walking sometimes," she said. "Old floors carry sound." The basement smelled like dust and bleach. The single window was half covered by soil from the outside, so it was always dim, no matter the time of day. But the strangest part was a locked door at the far end of the hallway, heavy wood with 3 metal latches. That night they watched a movie on Ethan's laptop until the sound of slow footsteps began above them. Back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm never changed. Riley tried to laugh it off, but after an hour, even she got quiet. At 3:12 a.m., something shifted under the floorboards, not above this time, but beneath them. A soft drag, like someone crawling below the basement itself. Ethan put his ear to the floor, and a knock came back, right where his head had been. They jumped, laughing nervously, convincing each other it was pipes or rats. But when they went to bed, the sound followed. 3 knocks, always in a row, always right before silence fell again. By morning, the old woman was gone. Her car wasn't in the driveway. They thought maybe she worked early until they noticed fresh dirt scattered near the locked door. The air felt heavier there, like the space beyond it was sucking the warmth from the room. Riley leaned close. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. From behind the door came faint, rhythmic tapping, the same 3 knocks, slower now. Ethan pressed his ear against the wood. A whisper came through, dry and distant, like breath scraping through gravel. It said, "Let me out." They ran, packed everything, left the key on the counter, and swore never to mention it again. But a week later, Riley got a message on her phone. No profile picture, no name, just, "Thank you for opening the door." She hadn't replied, but she showed Ethan the message. He went pale, because the truth was, when they left, he had unlatched that first lock. He didn't even know why. It felt like something had guided his hand. 2 days later, local news showed a photo of the house, yellow tape across the yard. The story said police found a sealed room under the basement, older than the house itself. Inside were dozens of old ID cards and a wooden chair with chains fixed to the floor. They never found the old woman. The listing stayed up for another week before disappearing, replaced by a new one titled "Cozy Lower Apartment, Recently Renovated." The first review said, "Great price, just ignore the knocking." The third story came from a woman named Tara, who booked a small guest house outside Asheville for a weekend retreat. She was an artist, just looking for quiet and space to work. The listing promised total privacy, a cabin set apart from the main home, surrounded by woods thick enough to swallow sound. When she arrived, the host wasn't there, just a key left in a chipped ceramic bowl by the door. The place was simple but nice. Pale walls, a tiny kitchen, a single bed by a big window facing the forest. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and soap. It was only after she unpacked that she noticed the photograph, a framed picture on the wall near the door, a woman standing in the same room, smiling toward the camera. The odd part was the mirror behind her. In it, the reflection showed the woman's smile, but her eyes were shut. That first night, Tara painted until midnight. The woods outside were alive with quiet noises, branches snapping, wind moving through leaves. Then, at exactly 12:47 a.m., everything went silent. Even the crickets stopped. The stillness lasted a long time before she heard a new sound, a soft creak near the window. She looked up. Nothing moved, but she could feel someone standing there, just beyond the glass. The next morning, she found a wet handprint on the outside of the pane. It was long and narrow, pressed so hard the outline of each fingertip was visible. She laughed it off at first, thinking maybe the condensation had shifted in the night. But when she turned to leave, the photo on the wall had changed. Now the smiling woman was gone. Only the empty cabin showed in the picture, and a faint pale blur standing near the bed. By evening, the air inside the guest house felt heavy, charged. The shadows stretched wrong across the floor, bending toward the bed even with the curtains drawn. She tried to read, but the pages shook in her hands. That's when she saw movement in the reflection of the window. Someone was sitting on the bed behind her. She spun around, no one there. But the pillow was indented as though someone had just risen from it. Tara slept in the car that night. She drove into town at sunrise and called the host. A calm older man answered. When she explained what happened, he just sighed. "You shouldn't have stayed alone," he said. "The guest house isn't meant for single travelers." She didn't ask what that meant. She just drove back to collect her things. But when she opened the cabin door, the photo was gone from the wall. In its place was a new one, a picture of her sleeping in the car outside. Her heart nearly stopped. She hadn't taken it. That afternoon, she filed a report with the local police. They checked the property, but found no signs of forced entry, no cameras, and no trace of anyone else. The guest house was removed from Airbnb the next day. 2 months later, a new listing appeared in the same area under a different name. Artist's Retreat, perfect for one. The cover photo showed the same pale walls, the same bed, and on the far wall, that same photograph, now with 2 figures in it, both blurry, both facing the camera. Sometimes a listing disappears for a reason. Sometimes it comes back wearing a new name, waiting for the next guest who doesn't read too closely. Which of these stories creeped you out the most? Tell us where you're listening from in the comments, and if you're brave enough to open another door, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales from the Black Hour Stories. Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight we begin with the first of 3 childhood friend tales, expanded and told the way memory never dares to be, clear, cold, and honest. If you clicked for old friends returning wrong, stay close. This one starts at a swing over dark water and ends where the current always wanted it to go. Jake had sworn off Miller's Creek by the time he could drive, but the smell of it never left him. It lived in the back of his throat when it rained, a mix of wet leaves, penny metal, and the sour breath of something that didn't like the sun. He and Danny had named the swing the Ship, because if you pumped your legs hard enough, your feet touched the low branch, and it felt like you could sail right over the brown water. They were 11 the summer Danny vanished. The last thing Jake remembered clearly was the way the rope burned his palms when he slowed the swing and turned to look for a snack in his backpack. He looked down for 5 seconds. When he looked up, the seat was empty, spinning, and the creek sounded like it was trying to laugh. Years sharpened the guilt. It made Jake good at keeping his head down, good at moving away. He tried different towns, different friends, different stories about why he hated bridges. But every birthday, the same dream returned. He stood in the clearing, the swing moving on its own, and someone crouched behind the cattails as if tying a shoe that wasn't there. He never told anyone that in the dream the cattails bent inward, like fingers closing. He didn't mean to go back. That's what he told himself, driving the old road with the cracked center line, a thermos of coffee cooling at his side. He was in town to sell his parents' empty house and sign a few papers. He could have avoided the turnoff, but the sign for Miller's Creek flashed past and his hands were already moving. The gravel popped against the undercarriage like knuckles. The trees were taller than memory, cedar and poplar, making a stained glass ceiling that turned noon into late afternoon. A smell of mud and iron seeped through the vents, and something colder came with it, a thin cold that wasn't weather. The clearing was still a clearing. Bracken and ferns, a patch of bare dirt worn into a shallow dish, and the creek widening into a brown pool where the bank undercut itself. The swing hung exactly where it had always hung, rope grey and swollen, seat a weathered plank, two nail heads winking like dull eyes. Jake told himself he'd stand at the tree for 5 minutes, look and leave. He stepped forward and felt the ground give just a little, as if the earth had been holding its breath and finally let it out. He touched the rope. There's a thing about old rope, it holds a memory of hands. The fibers felt familiar, but they were cold all the way through, as if they'd been soaking. His palm came away damp, though his fingertips were dry. He wiped them on his jeans and told himself it was dew. The creek spoke in slow clicks where water lipped a rusted shopping cart. Dragonflies skimmed like thrown needles. He tested the seat with his weight and then sat, the plank answering with a creak that sounded almost like a word swallowed back. He didn't push off. He just let himself sway. Behind the trees, a bird made a rusty hinge sound. He smelled the old smell of wet rope and the late summer algae that always stung Danny's eyes. It came back fast, too fast. Danny daring him to jump. Jake saying no, Danny making the face he made before he did something. In that memory, there had been a faint whistling from the water, like a bottle's mouth when wind crossed it. He hadn't remembered that detail until now. The whistling grew as he thought it, a low empty note rising from the center of the pool. He turned, and the air changed. The shade deepened like a held breath. The branches stilled as if listening. Someone stood on the far bank where the old root made a grip to climb up. Bare feet black with creek muck, blue t-shirt soaked to the ribs, hair plastered to a small skull. The same sharp chin, the same chipped front tooth. Danny. But not the boy who lost his balance and went under. This one had been somewhere cold and was still bringing its temperature with him. Jake didn't stand. He didn't call out. His throat knew better. The boy didn't wave. He tilted his head, like a dog listening for a sound that no one else hears. The skin at his calves carried a thin green sheen, as if a thin weed had fused with him. Drops fell from his fingertips and hit the dirt without soaking, pooling in perfect coins. He lifted one hand and pointed at the water with his index finger, the way he used to point at bats under the bridge. Jake followed that finger against his will. The pool held the sky but not the trees. It held a face too, and it was not his, though it echoed him. It was Danny's face in the depth, open and waiting. The mouth made a shape Jake knew. It formed his name but didn't use air. The name came like pressure on the inside of his ears, a sound already inside him, like when you hold your breath too long and something knocks. He stood so fast the swing shot back and returned, bumping the backs of his knees. He meant to step away, but the ropes eased forward and laid themselves along his forearms. The fibers were slick as eels, then dry as cord, then tight. Not a violent tightening, an insistent one, a polite constriction that assumed obedience. He tried to twist, but the ropes remembered the shape of a knot from years ago and tied it again. They didn't bite skin, they cooled it. He said the thing he had been saving for 20 years, the apology he had polished, and it slid away from his teeth like a fish. The boy on the bank tipped his head the other direction. Jake felt a second weight at his back, small hands settling against his shoulder blades as if steadying him on a bike. The whistling note rose from the water again, and this time the trees made the answering sound with their leaves, a shiver of mimicry. There are rules to places that don't belong to you. He understood one of them right then. The creek liked the number 2, 2 ropes, 2 nail heads, 2 boys, 2 sets of footprints side by side until one stopped. Another rule arrived with the smell of pennies. The creek kept what was given, but always offered something back. It brought back shoe tongues, plastic beads, blue bottle glass, and sometimes faces. It never brought back breath. A hush fell flat over the clearing. Even the gnats drew wide to the edges. The ropes slid higher, over wrists, over the backs of his hands, around his chest in a slow hug that outlasted refusal. His toes found the bald dirt and pushed, not forward, but back. The swing obeyed the old track carved in air and memory, a curved path the creek had memorized the way bodies memorize a bruise. Behind him, the small hands pressed, very gentle, the way a friend pushes when he promises he won't let go. The seat swept forward, and the air went thinner and colder in front of his teeth. He saw himself in the water with too much detail, a grown man's face bent over an 11-year-old's fear. He also saw other things layered faint as old film, a blue t-shirt sinking, a pale wrist snagged on a root and then freed by a pull that came from the wrong direction. Something pale like the inside of a fish mouth, opening under the shelf of mud and closing again. He didn't want to see it, but he had wanted to know for 20 years, and the creek loved exact wishes. The ropes gave him 3 long swings, slow like the counting down you do before jumping into cold water. On the first, he heard a voice that sounded like wind in a soda can say that they had kept the seat open for him. On the second, the whistling split into 2 notes, and the boy on the bank raised his other hand and held up 2 fingers. On the third, the cold of the rope soaked through his sternum like ice water through paper, and the boy stepped back, satisfied, the way kids do when a game finally goes the way they imagined. He could have thrown himself sideways. He could have let his weight break the plank and collapse to dirt. That thought lit and died like a wet match. The ropes didn't fight him. They had time. That was the worst of it. The creek had all the time there ever was. An old leaf, half-rotted and lace-veined, drifted past the thickest part of the current and brushed the mirrored face below. The face smiled in a way that didn't make a mouth shape, like a ripple that only goes inward. He tried to speak Danny's name, but a different name rose uninvited, one they had whispered once as a dare, a name they thought they made up the last summer to scare younger kids from the ship, the Keeper Under. They had joked that if you fed it enough bottle caps and bent nails, it would watch over your secrets, and if you stopped feeding it, it would ask for something that could walk to it. He had forgotten that joke until now. The water had not. The next push didn't come from behind. It came from below. The swing slowed at the top of its arc, and something under the plank lifted with a soft press like the palm of a hand from the underside of ice. The ropes tightened like seat belts in a sudden stop. His feet left the dirt. The air cooled further. His teeth ached. His eyes watered without crying. He felt the exact weight of a boy's hand settle into his left palm, fingers small and cold, gripping for balance. The creek rose or he dipped. He couldn't tell which. The brown surface was no longer flat. It was a mouth remembering how to open. It opened where the root made a dark pocket under the bank, and something pale edged forward like a throat stepping into light. It didn't look like a monster. It looked like a shape water makes when it remembers the last thing it held. It had no face, but it had attention. It had patience shaped into a thing. Jake saw how it would go, the ropes answering that patience with their own. The swing's path narrowing, the plank sinking inch by inch until a man who had kept his head down for 2 decades finally bowed it in the right place. He saw the little exchange that would complete the rule. The creek would return the boy the world remembered and keep the man the creek had known all along, a trade in even numbers. The boy on the far bank smiled the way you smile when you finally get picked up from a long wait. He didn't look cruel. He looked relieved. He wasn't dripping anymore. The mud at his feet had stopped taking his weight. It seemed to hold him up. The whistling note softened into the simple hush of breath through teeth. If there had been words, they would have been thanks. There were no words. Only the knowledge of a promise kept late. They found the clearing the next morning because a hiker's dog refused the path and whined until its owner followed. The swing spun slowly as if cooling after a long run. The ropes hung smooth, no scuffs, no broken fibers. The ground showed two sets of prints, one big, one small, side by side to the water's lip, and then no more. On a flat rock by the tree, a rusty bottle cap and a bent nail sat like coins on a gravestone. The creek made its simple creak sound, and if you listened too long you could swear it split into two notes as steady and patient as something counting. People said wind. People always said wind. A few old-timers shook their heads and said that the ship had always needed two. They didn't say the name kids used in the late 90s. Names like that don't get said out loud much. But sometimes, on the hottest part of a dry summer, the water at Miller's Creek looks wet in a way that is more than wet. It looks attentive. It looks like it is remembering you before you arrive. If you go, never bring even numbers, and never ever sit if the ropes feel cold all the way through. The creek gives back what you ask for, just not in the way you think. 2 ropes, 2 boys, 1 debt paid late. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. If you're ready for story 2, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter from the Black Hour stories. Our second story title is The Basement Game. Clara had forgotten a lot about her childhood home, but the basement came back too easily. It always smelled like rain before a storm, metal, dirt, and something old that had no name. She and her 2 friends, Tess and Mark, spent half their summer down there making up games their parents wouldn't have allowed if they'd known. The best one, the one that made them legends for a few months in their little neighborhood, was the basement game. The rules were simple. Turn off every light, spin around 3 times, and whisper the name of whoever you wanted to summon. It started as a dare after a sleepover movie about seances. The first few rounds were harmless. They called for cartoon characters, old pets or dead presidents, giggling at every flicker of a shadow. But then Tess got bored and said, "Let's make one up. One that actually lives here." Mark laughed. Clara didn't. They wrote the name together with a red crayon on the inside of an old cardboard box they used as a fort. Tess thought for a second, then scrawled, "The Friend Below." It sounded dumb when she said it, but the name stuck. They decided he was a friendly spirit that only appeared to kids who could stay in the dark long enough to hear him. "If you open your eyes too soon, he'll know you're scared," Tess said. They chanted it one night, 3 kids in total blackness whispering that name between nervous giggles. "Friend below. Friend below." The words faded into the sound of the house breathing, the hum of the furnace, the creak of the stairs. Then something tapped once beneath the floorboards. Clara had felt it through her knees, light at first, then again, sharper. They screamed, turned on the lights, and found nothing. The furnace wasn't running. The basement floor was cold enough to sting. A week later, Mark fell through one of the basement steps. His shin split open, and he swore something had grabbed his ankle first. His parents banned him from coming back. Tess still visited, but she acted strange, quiet, restless, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Then came Clara's 10th birthday. She woke that morning to see her bedroom window fogged from the inside, a single word traced in it. Play? Her parents thought she did it herself. She tried to believe that too, until she noticed the mark at the base of her bed, a smudge that looked like a handprint made of dirt. That was the last night she slept in that room. Within a month, her family moved. Her dad called it a fresh start. Clara didn't argue. 15 years later, Clara was living alone in a small apartment over a laundromat. She worked nights at a pharmacy, kept the lights bright, and stayed far away from basements. It worked mostly, until one evening she saw Tess again. It was in the grocery store near the frozen foods. Tess looked thinner, her hair too long, her eyes always darting behind Clara's shoulder. They hugged out of habit, awkwardly. Clara tried to laugh about their old games, but Tess didn't smile. "You still hear it, don't you?" she whispered. Clara blinked. "Hear what?" "The tapping." Tess's voice shook. "Under the floor. You moved, but he didn't." Then Tess walked away, leaving her cart behind. That night Clara dreamed of the old basement again. The air felt damp. The concrete sweated like skin. Something whispered her name from below the stairs. She woke up, gasping, her hand still reaching for the pull chain of a light that wasn't there. Her apartment's clock blinked 3:03 a.m. She couldn't fall back asleep. The floor creaked once, near the hallway closet. Then again, closer. She grabbed her phone and called Tess's number. No answer. She left the light on until sunrise. The next morning, her manager pulled her aside before her shift. "Hey, you knew that girl, right? Tess Reynolds. They said she—" He trailed off, looking unsure. "They found her in her basement. She was digging, for hours, they think, right through the concrete." Clara's stomach turned cold. The article came out that afternoon. Tess's neighbors had called the police after hearing banging all night. When they broke down the basement door, they found her kneeling in front of a hole big enough for her to crawl through, fingernails gone, hands raw. The report mentioned a single phrase she'd scrawled on the wall beside her: "He's still waiting." Clara threw up in the pharmacy's restroom. She told herself it wasn't true, that Tess had just snapped. But when she came home that evening, her hallway light flickered 3 times, the way it always used to when they started the game. She unplugged the lamp. It kept flickering. Then came the knock, 3 taps, faint, from under her floor. Clara moved within a week. A new building, top floor, no basement this time. She told no one about the knock, not even her mother. She bought new shoes, new furniture, a new life. It worked again, for a while, until one night the bulb above her bathroom mirror flickered, and she saw something in the reflection behind her. A shape bending forward, as if leaning out from the wall. Just dark enough to be mistaken for a shadow, just long enough for her breath to stall. The next morning she found the red crayon. It was lying neatly on her nightstand, its paper torn halfway down, like a peeled apple skin. She hadn't seen one since she was 10. She couldn't bring herself to throw it out. Instead, she locked it in a drawer. For 3 nights everything was quiet. Then she started hearing humming. Not a song, just a single, drawn-out note, like a child trying to tune a whistle. It came from the floor. She laid on her stomach one night, pressed her ear against the hardwood, and heard faint scratching. Soft, quick, patient, like little fingers moving through dust. The next day she called her building's maintenance office. The man came up, knocked on the floor, laughed and said, "You've probably got mice." He left a trap. That night, the trap went off, but when Clara checked, there was no mouse, just a folded piece of lined paper. Inside, written in a shaky red crayon, were 3 words: "Your turn, Clara." She burned the paper in the sink and left the tap running until the smoke turned to steam. She started sleeping on the couch after that, afraid of what might wait beneath her bed. Every night the tapping moved, not louder, closer, always 3 knocks, sometimes a pause, then 3 again. One night, the power went out across the building. She lit a candle and sat on the floor, staring at the dark under the couch. The wax smell mixed with something earthy, like old dirt. Then came a whisper from below her. "Ready or not?" She jumped to her feet, candle shaking. The whisper came again, stretched and distorted, like it had traveled through miles of soil. "Here I come." Her phone buzzed suddenly. Tess's name appeared on the screen, the contact she'd deleted months ago. Clara froze, hand trembling as she swiped to answer. A child's voice came through, flat, curious. "You stopped playing?" Then silence. The call ended itself. Clara stared at the floor until morning light pushed through the blinds. For once she didn't hear anything. She thought maybe it was finally over. She went to the drawer, took out the red crayon, and snapped it in half. That night, the tapping stopped, but the next morning she found a new message on her bathroom mirror, traced into the fog from her shower. "You broke me. Now I'll fix you." No one saw Clara after that. Her landlord entered the apartment 2 weeks later, when neighbors complained about water leaking through the ceiling. They found the bathtub full of muddy water and handprints smeared across the tiles. The floorboards near the couch had been pried up from below. Underneath, in the crawl space, police found a small cardboard box. Inside, written in red crayon, were 3 names: Clara, Tess, and Mark, and beneath them, one final word: friend. No one could trace the number that called her phone that last night. It wasn't in service. Sometimes tenants say they still hear tapping in the pipes, 3 knocks at a time, when the lights go out during storms. Some childhood games never end. They just wait for someone new to take their turn. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments, and if you ever hear 3 knocks under your floor, don't answer. Like and subscribe for the final story from the Black Hour Stories. Our third story is The Empty Desk. Ryan remembered almost every detail from his 3rd grade classroom: the smell of chalk dust, the hum of the radiator, the way the sun fell through those narrow windows around noon. He remembered the posters, the seating chart, the 23 faces of his classmates. What he couldn't remember, no matter how hard he tried, was the name of the boy who used to sit behind him. That missing name had started haunting him in his late 20s. He could picture the boy perfectly. Dark hair that curled behind his ears, green shoelaces that never stayed tied, a shy smile that came and went too fast. But when Ryan tried to say his name, his mind froze like a skipped record. He brought it up once over beers with an old classmate. She laughed, shaking her head. "We only had 23 kids in that class, Ryan, not 24. Ryan didn't argue, but deep down he knew she was wrong. He could see that 4th desk. Empty now, sure. But back then, someone had filled it. Someone quiet. Someone who drew trees during math. He could still see the pencil moving across the page, making small, slow circles for the leaves. That image followed him through high school, college, adulthood, like a fragment of a dream he couldn't wake from. When the district offered him a job teaching 3rd grade at his old elementary school, he took it without hesitation. Maybe he wanted closure. Maybe he thought being back in that room would shake something loose. The school hadn't changed much. The paint was new, but the air still carried that dry, powdery scent of erased chalk and mop water. His first day as a teacher was strange, standing in front of the same green board where he used to copy spelling words. He walked between the rows of desks, tapping the tops with his hand, feeling the small dents where generations of pencils had pressed too hard. And then he found it. The desk by the far window. The one that had always seemed to sit slightly crooked. The chair beside it was missing, and on the desktop a faint mark. 3 letters carved so shallow they almost disappeared under the polish. L-E. The last letter was gone. Scraped off maybe, or never finished. He brushed dust away and felt a shiver crawl up his arm, something electric and old. He looked for the name in old class lists, report cards, photos. None showed a student with a name starting with L-E. In the class photo from that year, there were only 23 faces. He stared at the back row, the small gap between 2 kids where the missing boy should have stood. The space felt deliberate. That night, while organizing papers at his desk, Ryan noticed the sound of pencil on paper. Soft, steady. Someone was drawing. He turned, expecting to see one of his students who had stayed behind, but the room was empty. The noise came again from the far corner, from that desk. A single sheet of notebook paper lay there. He watched as a line appeared, slow, shaking, pressing hard enough to groove the surface. Another line followed. Then small shapes, branches, leaves, and at the bottom a crude outline of a man hanging from a tree. Ryan backed away. His breath fogged in the still air. The radiator had gone silent. On the paper, below the drawing, new words scratched themselves into the page. "You forgot me." The next morning, the paper was gone. Maybe the janitor threw it out, Ryan told himself. He stayed busy that day, grading, teaching, smiling, but at the edge of every thought came the same question. What was his name? That night he stayed late again. He brought a flashlight as if expecting a power outage. Around 9, the lights flickered once, then steadied. The flashlight rolled off the desk by the window and clattered to the floor. When he bent to pick it up, he saw small footprints in the chalk dust, child-sized, bare, leading from the classroom door to the empty desk. He followed them, his pulse pounding in his throat. As he stepped closer, his own reflection blinked at him from the window, except it wasn't quite him. The reflection moved half a second slower, and behind it, in the glass, stood the outline of a boy. Ryan spun around, but the classroom was empty. The door creaked softly open, then shut again, though no one entered. He walked to the desk, his hand trembling as he lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of papers folded tight, old and yellow. He opened one. Each had the same drawing, a tree, always the same shape, always the same boy hanging from its branches. Some were smudged with what looked like wet fingerprints. Others had tiny writing at the bottom. "I'm still here." The next day, Ryan found a note slipped under his classroom door. No handwriting, just blocky letters pressed into the paper as if drawn with the edge of a coin. "It's almost time for recess." He didn't understand it at first. Then he remembered how back then the missing boy never went outside. Every recess he stayed inside and drew trees at his desk while everyone else played. When the bell rang, he'd stay another minute, staring at the window before packing up. That memory brought another, one he hadn't thought of since childhood. The last day the boy had been there, rain tapping the windows, the teacher sending everyone to the library because a pipe had burst near the basement. When they came back, his desk was empty. No coat, no bag, no shoes, just a small puddle by the window. Ryan told the principal, who brushed it off. Probably just old pipes again. That classroom's always been damp. But the next night, when he turned off the lights, the same tapping started. Not rain this time, knuckles on glass. 3 slow taps. Pause, then 3 more. He approached the window. The reflection moved on its own, a shadow boy behind him. Then, in the fog, his breath left. Letters formed backward on the glass. "Let me in." He stepped back fast, knocking over a chair. When he looked again, the words were gone. Ryan stopped going home at normal hours. He told himself he needed to catch up on work, but really he couldn't stand being alone in the dark at home. The school at least gave him walls he could patrol. One night he fell asleep at his desk. He dreamed of standing at the front of the classroom while his students stared blank-faced. Every desk was filled except one, the one by the window. In that empty seat sat a shadow, blacker than the rest of the room, watching him. When he woke, the room was ice-cold. The papers on his desk had been rearranged. The top one now bore a new drawing, a schoolroom identical to his, with him sitting in the empty desk. That was when he decided to quit. He never made it to his last day. When the janitor opened the classroom that morning, every desk was perfectly aligned except one, pulled slightly away from the row. On it sat a new piece of paper, damp around the edges. It showed 24 students lined up for a class photo. The 24th figure was standing in the very back, hand on Ryan's shoulder. The drawing's eyes had been filled in with dark pencil circles, so deep they almost tore through the page. Ryan's car was still in the lot, keys on the front seat. His phone lay on his desk, screen cracked. The only thing missing was his teacher's ID badge. When police searched the school, they found it later that night. It was lying on the windowsill beside that same desk, partly covered by a film of condensation. Next to it was a small, child-sized handprint, pressed into the frost from the inside. Teachers who use that classroom now say the radiator runs cold no matter how high they turn the heat. Kids sitting near the window complain that someone whispers during reading time, tracing shapes on their desks with invisible fingers. One substitute told the janitor she'd seen a boy sitting in that corner after dismissal, dark hair, green shoelaces untied, watching her erase the board. When she looked away and turned back, the seat was empty. The janitor shrugged when asked about it. "That room's been off for years," he said. "Doesn't surprise me." But when he mopped the floors at night, he always left that desk for last. He said it seemed to move an inch closer to the window every time he looked away. Some friends fade from memory. Others stay just long enough to be remembered again. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments, and if someone you forgot ever calls your name from behind, don't turn around. Like and subscribe for more haunted stories from the Black Hour Stories. 3 people, 3 different nights, and 3 things that refuse to stay dead. Each one still reaches across the line between the living and the lost. Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight's episode brings you 3 true ghost encounters you'll never forget. These aren't legends or movie plots. They happen to ordinary people who swear what they saw was real. Let's begin with the first story. Story 1, The Motel Mirror. Kayla didn't plan to stop in that town. She'd been driving 12 hours straight, cutting through empty desert between Texas and New Mexico, the kind of landscape that makes you forget you're still on Earth. The sun was a dull orange bruise sinking behind the mesas when her check engine light started flashing. The next gas station was 30 miles away, so she turned off the highway when she saw the old sign, Ravenwood Motel, vacancy. The office smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. A fan spun lazily behind the counter. The man working there didn't look up when she came in. He just slid a paper form toward her and said, "Room 7, don't mind the mirror." She thought he was joking. The line delivery felt half asleep, but when she got to her room she understood why he said it. The place looked like a museum of things no one wanted anymore. Faded carpet, cigarette burns on the dresser, a Bible warped from old water damage, and on the far wall above the dresser was a massive mirror, too big for a motel. The frame was black wood, carved with looping shapes that almost looked like vines, or letters from an alphabet she didn't know. The glass itself was flawless, no scratches, no fog. It reflected the entire room in crisp detail. She set her bag down and saw something strange in the reflection. Her suitcase had landed half open, a red scarf hanging out, but in the mirror, the scarf wasn't there. The rest of the reflection matched perfectly, but not that small bit of color. When she looked down at the real scarf, it was still there, spilling out across the carpet. She glanced up again. Gone in the mirror. She laughed nervously. Probably lighting, she thought. Desert sunset messing with her eyes. She shut the curtains and turned on the lamp. The room turned dull and still again. When she looked once more, the scarf had returned in the reflection, right where it should be. That night, wind scraped along the windows. The air conditioner rattled like someone kicking a metal pipe. Kayla drifted off, still wearing her sweatshirt, her phone face down beside her. She dreamed she was standing in front of that mirror, brushing her hair. Only her reflection wasn't copying her movements. It was running its hand along the glass, like it was feeling for a door. She woke to a tap, then another. The sound came from the direction of the dresser. She turned on the lamp. The mirror was dark, catching only a thin slice of her face in the light. Something behind the glass seemed to move, slow, watery shapes, as if someone was standing just on the other side. She whispered, "Hello?" Then immediately regretted saying anything. The tapping came again, faster, desperate. She grabbed her keys and tried to open the door, but the lock jammed. The air in the room grew heavier, hotter. In the mirror, the reflection began to twist, the walls stretching like melted wax. Her reflection's face was pale, lips parted in a strange smile. Then a handprint appeared inside the mirror, not on the surface but inside, as if pressed from another world. The palm slid downward, smearing faint gray streaks. Kayla's stomach turned. She backed away until she hit the bed. The reflection stepped forward. Not her, but something using her shape. Its eyes were too dark. Its mouth kept smiling as its head tilted in tiny jerks. Then it raised its hand and tapped once on the inside of the glass. Tap. The light flickered. The sound from the air conditioner turned into a low hum, like someone whispering just below hearing. Kayla shouted for help, but her voice sounded muffled, as though the room itself was swallowing the sound. Then the glass rippled, just a wave across the surface like water disturbed. The reflection pressed both hands against it and leaned closer until its face filled the frame. When it smiled, Kayla saw something white fall from its mouth, teeth, one by one, clicking softly against the other side of the glass. She ran to the door again, slamming her shoulder into it. On the third hit, the door gave way. She stumbled outside into cold desert air. The parking lot was empty, not a single car except hers. The office light was off. She turned to look at the window of her room and froze. Someone was still in there. Her shape stood behind the curtains, faintly outlined by lamplight, moving slowly toward the glass. She didn't go back. She drove through the night until sunrise, stopping only when her gas tank was near empty. She never told anyone about it, not her sister, not her friends. But months later, scrolling through local news, she saw something that made her hands go cold. A short article. Ravenwood Motel closed after guest disappearance. The police photo showed the same door, room 7. The mirror above the dresser was cracked clean down the middle. Beneath the picture, a line from the property manager read, "The mirror's gone missing. We never found who took it." She stared at the screen for a long time before locking her phone. When she looked at her car's side mirror, she caught a flicker, something that looked like her, smiling faintly, but not matching her movement. Story 2. The Snowfield Visitor. Marcus liked the sound of snow settling. It was a soft hiss, like tiny grains pouring into a jar. Up north, where the pines crowded the hills and the road ended in a white line, that sound was his company. He rented a small cabin for the winter, one room and a loft, a wood stove that breathed slow heat, and windows that looked onto a clearing where deer sometimes passed. He took photos for magazines, mostly animals and weather. He liked things that didn't pose. The days were short and white, the nights were long and blue. He fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, check the sky, check the temperature, sling the camera over his shoulder and go looking for tracks. Sometimes fox, sometimes rabbit, sometimes a single line of grouse feet, little commas curving toward the shivering creek. His boots squeaked on the crusted snow, and his breath rose in slow smoke. He found them on the 11th morning. Small prints, bare, 5 toes and a soft groove at the heel. They started at the edge of the clearing as if someone had stepped down out of the air. No leading path, no sign of a shoe. He crouched and pressed one gloved hand beside a print. The toes were as long as his, but thinner. The skin had made a smooth shine on the snow, as if the foot had been cold enough to frost its own outline. They went straight into the trees, neat and steady. He followed, one careful step after another, camera dangling, eyes scanning for any movement. The woods were quiet. Pines held snow like white caps. A jay shouted once and then nothing. The prints never broke or stumbled, just a perfect chain crossing a small drift skirting an oak, crossing a frozen creek that rang under his weight like a dull bell. After a quarter-mile, the prints stopped. They ended in the middle of a wide field where wind had scoured the snow to glass. Marcus circled the area twice. Nothing. No return line, no scramble, no sign of a fall, as if the walker had kept going into a white overhead. He took 3 photos, wide, mid, close, his breath feathering the lens each time. He headed back as the cold bit harder. It was that deep cold that gets into your fingertips even with thick gloves. He saw his own path in the snow behind him and felt better, a human line going back home. But when the cabin came into view, yellow light under the eaves, smoke from the stove, he saw another path next to his. A second line, faint but real, running parallel from the field right up to his steps. Bare feet again. 5 toes, thin heel. His stomach went tight, hot against the cold. He kept moving. He didn't look left or right. Inside, he stamped off his boots and shut the door tight. The stove ticked as the logs settled. Heat wrapped the room with that dry pine sap smell. He set the camera on the table, pulled off his gloves, and held his hands near the iron. It took a long time for the numb to leave. As it did, he noticed another smell, faint, clean, sharp, the smell of new snow right after it falls. It came from the hallway that led to the small bathroom and the back door. He walked the hall. Frost hugged the inside of the window panes like a lattice of white ferns. The back door had a dust of ice along the lock, as if someone had exhaled against it. He touched the knob. It was colder than the air around it, cold enough to sting. He told himself the mind makes patterns out of nothing. The wind cut strange shapes. Ice formed where air leaked. He ate canned soup and warmed his fingers around the bowl. He uploaded the photos, the field, the perfect prints, his own tracks heading home. When he zoomed in, he saw something he hadn't noticed in the field, just at the edge of the close shot, a blur that was not wind. It was tall and thin and shaped like a person, but its edges looked brittle, like a crust of hoar frost blown into a rough figure. He stared until his eyes ached. When he blinked, the screen had a mark on it. 5 pale smudges at the lower right corner, 5 fingertip shapes. He wiped them away with his sleeve, but they stayed. They weren't on the screen, they were on the picture inside the file, as though the cold had burned fingerprints into the pixels. Marcus slept with the stove full and the lights off. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves. At 3 in the morning, the wind died, and the world went deep and still. That was when he heard it. A careful step in the snow, slow and testing, right outside the window by his bed. Then another. Then another. A pause. He held his breath. The stillness pressed on his chest. He smelled that new snow smell again, clean and empty. Something leaned against the glass. The pane made a tiny dry sound, not a crack but a stretch, like ice asking for another degree. Another faint sound followed, close to his ear, breath fogging and clearing. He lay as quiet as he could, socked feet tucked up off the floor, hands flat on his chest. The glass chilled the air around his face. He didn't look. In the morning, the window was beautiful and wrong. A perfect print on the inside. 5 narrow fingers tested against the frost, reaching down to where his head had been. A smudge at the center of the palm. He took a photo on his phone and then turned the stove up high until the pattern melted. But even when it turned to water and ran in thin streams, the finger shapes lingered, like the memory of a grip. The second day's light felt dimmer, even at noon. He strapped on the camera again and followed the new set of prints that now circled the cabin. They were not curious prints. They were patient. They looped the walls, paused at each window, stepped to the edge of the porch and waited. He took no more photos that day. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, the wind did not come back. The snow dampened every far sound. The clock above the stove clicked softly at the minute, and the stovepipe groaned once like an old throat clearing. Marcus set a chair under the latch at the back door. He lay on the bed and did not close his eyes. At 3:10, as if the hour itself were a switch, the breath returned to the window. He sat up and saw his own breath mixed with something else's, two fogs rising and falling on either side of the glass. The pane shivered white in a circle, as if a mouth were resting there. His name came out of that circle. The voice was small and had the sound of air frozen in a bottle and then poured out again. He didn't answer. The voice said his name again and waited. The waiting felt longer than the sound. When he didn't respond, the voice moved to the door, and the cold under the frame thickened until his socks crisped with frost. The chair under the latch made a tiny squeal as the wood tightened. He watched the metal turn white at the edges, hoar crystals growing like hair. The next morning there were bare prints in the hall, from the back door past the bathroom, stopping just at the foot of his bed. He did not own feet that small or thin. He crouched and pressed a finger into one print. The snow had not blown in. The print had formed in the grit and dust of the floor, and his finger came away wet and freezing, as if the hole itself were a tiny patch of winter. He should have left then, but the snow came heavy. By noon, a white curtain erased the trees. Travel today would be a slow death. He stayed. He chopped extra wood until his lungs burned. He checked the latch twice. He kept the camera on the table with the lens cap off, a strange kind of comfort. At 3 that afternoon, the storm muffled the world to a hum, white pressed against every window. He could not see his own porch rail. A thunk sounded on the back step, not a knock, a dropped weight. He stood in the hall and watched the crack under the door light to a pale line. When he leaned closer, the light shifted like someone had stepped in front of the drift beyond. He went to the front door instead. He unlatched it, opened it to a slice, and took a single picture into the white. The flash bounced back and made the yard look like a sheet hung 3 inches from his face. When the image appeared on the screen, he saw the clearing as if the storm thinned for the camera. In that thinness stood the figure again, nearer now. It had no face, just 2 round cups of darker air where eyes should be, like the snow there had been scooped and not refilled. The body was narrow as a birch trunk and ended in bare, pale feet that did not sink. He shut the door. He sat on the floor. He waited for night because night meant only one thing at a time. Day stacked fear on chores. At 3:10, the voice spoke through the keyhole. His name pulled into a long shape that did not sound quite human. Then a shorter word, please. Between each word was the sound of air freezing and cracking. Marcus took the chair from the back door and set it aside. He opened the door. Cold hit him like a wall. The clearing was bright with stormlight, though it was full night. The figure stood on the steps, not 3 feet away. Frost grew from it, the way hair grows from skin. No eyes, just those hollow places. No mouth, but a breath spot on the air between them like a glass held up to a cold window. A windless, clean scent filled his head, dizzy and empty. He said his name first just to feel alive. Then he said, "You can't stay." The figure tilted its head. It stepped once into the doorway. The wood under its foot groaned and went white, rhymed in a circle. It did not touch him. It did not move farther in. It stood and listened like someone at a threshold trying to learn a house. His camera was still on the table behind him, open eye toward the hall. Without thinking, he reached and snapped a shot. The flash stuttered. The figure collapsed inward, as if it were made of ash. It blew through him, untouched, and vanished, not by walking, but by falling into the thin seam where warm air meets cold. The breath spot on the air hung for a moment and then faded. The next morning, the storm was over. Sun made the snow glitter so bright his eyes watered. He stepped out and looked. No fresh prints in the clearing, no marks near the windows. He walked to the field where he had first found the path. The wind had scraped it clean again. He took a final photo, just space, just winter. On his way back, he saw one thing he couldn't explain. At the exact spot where the figure had stood the night before, the top layer of snow had turned to a thin glass. The shape of 2 feet was frozen there, not pressed into the snow, but lifted out of it, like ice had grown in the absence of weight. He touched one with his finger. It was so cold it burned and left a painless numb that lasted all day. He left the cabin the next week. The road was barely clear. He put the photos into a folder he never opened again. The magazines took his animal shots and paid him on time. They called the winter images eerie and beautiful, but not quite useful. He didn't argue. He still wakes at 3:10. He listens to the windows. He tries not to breathe too loud. Sometimes, just before sleep swallows the rest of his hearing, he smells new snow even in deep summer. Sometimes he finds small, wet shapes on the hardwood floor of his apartment, smooth and cold, evaporating before he can show anyone. Sometimes he takes a picture of his own face in the bathroom mirror and sees just over his shoulder a thin space where someone should be, a space that looks like a person cut out of air. He lives on the 12th floor. There's no snow up there, there's no field, no pines, no old stove. But when the wind dies and the building holds still, he can hear a careful step outside his window. Slow, testing, patient. A breath finds the glass and leaves a circle. His name slides through it in a voice made of frost. He does not answer. He knows the rule now. At 3:10, no matter where he is, it will always find the shortest path to the warmest room and ask to be let in. He keeps the camera close and the lights on and tells himself over and over that lights are only light and not a door. Story 3. The Cemetery Voice. Lena didn't mind working alone at night. The cemetery was quiet in a way the world rarely was anymore. No cars, no phones, no voices except wind and insects. She liked how the place seemed to breathe, how the trees creaked and sighed, how the stone angels stared through fog as if still keeping watch. She'd been the night groundskeeper at Willowshade Cemetery for almost a year. It was a small fenced property on a rural road in Pennsylvania, tucked behind a church that hadn't held Sunday service in decades. Her job was simple: clear branches, check the lights, lock the maintenance shed, and make sure no one was breaking in to vandalize graves. Most nights, it was peaceful enough to make her forget time. That changed after the rainstorm. It came hard and fast, one of those early spring downpours that seemed to shake the ground. Lightning flashed over the hills, showing the grave markers in sharp white bursts. Lena watched from her truck, wipers flapping, until the worst passed. Around midnight, when the thunder rolled away, she stepped out into the mist to check for damage. The air smelled heavy, full of wet dirt and moss. The rain had washed everything clean, but the silence that followed felt strange. Even the crickets had gone quiet. She walked her usual route with her flashlight sweeping across stones. The beam hit one of the newer graves, fresh dirt still soft from last week's burial. The headstone had a name she half remembered: Anthony Harper. Aged 27. The flowers were wilted and pressed into the mud. She adjusted them out of habit. Then her radio crackled. It was the two-way handheld the office kept on the same channel as her supervisor, but she knew he wasn't around. He only worked daytime hours. Static whispered, soft at first, then sharper. She raised it to her ear, expecting interference from the storm. But under the static she heard a voice. Low. Rough. like someone trying to speak underwater. "Help me." Lena froze. She lowered the radio. The air felt colder all at once. Another burst of static. "Help me. Please." She scanned the graves with her flashlight. The beam shook in her hand. The voice had sounded close, too close. She stepped back toward the truck, but the sound came again, clearer now, and this time it wasn't from the radio. It came from the ground. She turned slowly, the light landing on that same fresh grave. The dirt seemed to pulse, a soft shifting like breath moving through soil. Her throat went dry. She told herself it was water draining after the rain, air pockets collapsing. That happened sometimes, she'd heard. Perfectly normal. Then the voice came again, unmistakably human, only muffled. "I'm still here." Lena dropped the flashlight. The beam spun across wet grass and lit the name on the headstone again. She backed away, but something moved in the soil, a hand. Pale fingers broke the surface, clawing weakly through the mud. The hand opened, grasped, and slipped back under. She ran to the truck. Her keys fumbled slick with rain. She locked the doors, shaking. Her breath fogged the windshield. The radio hissed again, louder now, the voice rasping through the speaker. "You buried me." "Wrong." She turned the radio off. It turned itself back on. Static filled the cab. The voice rose through it, not begging now, but furious. "You left me there." The windows trembled with the sound, as if the whole truck had become a throat. Then, all at once, silence. Lena sat frozen, the engine off, rainwater dripping from her jacket onto the seat. When she finally dared to look up, she saw movement in the headlights. A figure stood at the edge of the lot, tall, dark, soaked to the skin. He was turned toward her, but his face was nothing but shadow. Mud streaked down his chest like veins. His arms hung limp, but his hands were clenched. She blinked, and he was gone. Only the muddy trail where he'd stood remained. The next morning she told her boss Carl that someone had broken in during the night. He checked the grounds with her, shaking his head the whole time. No footprints but hers. The dirt on Anthony Harper's grave looked freshly turned, but not disturbed. "Probably animals," Carl said, though his eyes didn't match his voice. These new graves settle funny after rain. She wanted to believe that. She did. But as they walked away, she heard her radio, still hanging from her belt, crackle one more time. A breath, long and wet, and then a whisper that slid straight through her. "Don't leave me again." She quit 2 nights later, but the voice didn't stop. It started showing up in other ways. Her phone ringing once at 12:04 a.m. every night, no number showing. Sometimes she'd hear it through the drain when she was washing dishes, just faint enough to make her doubt herself. "Help me. You buried me." Once, while driving home late from a grocery run, her headlights caught someone standing by the roadside. A man, pale and dripping wet, mud streaked across his chest. His face was blank, as if the features had been rubbed away. She sped past, heart pounding. When she checked the rearview mirror, he wasn't there. 2 weeks later, she drove back to the cemetery during daylight. She told herself she needed closure, that it would look harmless under the sun. The air was bright and warm. She parked outside the rusted gates, took a deep breath, and walked in with her phone ready to take pictures just in case. The place looked almost peaceful. Green grass, trimmed hedges, birds chirping. Nothing haunted about it at all. But when she reached Harper's grave, she stopped. The headstone was gone. Only a flat patch of dirt remained. The hole had sunk deeper, leaving a small depression like a shallow bowl. At the bottom of that dip was something half-buried, a radio. Her old one, the same brand and color, with her initials scratched into the back. It was on. Static hissed faintly through the speaker. She knelt and brushed away the soil with trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the radio, the sound stopped. Then, clear as if someone were kneeling beside her, a voice said, "Thank you for coming back." Lena screamed and dropped it. The speaker popped and went dead. When she looked around, she saw no one, just rows of silent stones. The breeze that passed through the cemetery carried the damp smell of rain again, even though the sky was clean and blue. She turned to leave and froze. Every headstone around her now bore the same name, Anthony Harper, hundreds of them, each one carved with the same birth and death dates, the same short inscription, "Still waiting." She backed toward the gate, not daring to blink. Her feet slipped on the grass. When she looked down, she saw that the earth beneath her shoes was wet, dark, and soft, though there hadn't been rain in weeks. Mud clung to her ankles, pulling harder the more she struggled. Then, faint and far below, she heard him again. "You came back too late." The ground shifted. She ripped free and bolted to her truck, panting so hard she could barely breathe. She looked once in the rearview mirror as she drove off. The gates of the cemetery stood wide open now, swaying in the breeze. And in the reflection of her side mirror, just for a moment, she saw a man walking along the fence line, his hand trailing across the iron bars. His mouth was moving, but his face was the same washed-out blur. She doesn't go near graveyards anymore, not even to visit her parents. But every now and then, when rain starts to fall hard on her roof, her phone buzzes once at exactly 12:04. And if she answers, just once, because she always tells herself not to, she hears only one word before the line goes dead. "Wait." 3 different people, 3 places that should have been safe. Yet something from the other side still found a way through. Maybe some doors stay open once they're touched. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. And if you enjoy these true hauntings, don't forget to like and subscribe for more nights like this, here on the Black Hour Stories. These are 3 nights where something that looked like a person crossed the line into something else. They began as small wrongnesses and ended with people running from voices that wore human shapes. Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight, the desert is thin and cold, and the dark sits low like an animal. 3 separate nights, 3 ordinary people who met something that walked like a human but did not belong inside one. Each story moves quick and hard. You'll feel the terror arrive and spread. Stay with it. Our first title of the night is The Thing on Highway 191. Darren had driven that stretch of Highway 191 so many times he could find the dips and bends by muscle memory. The cab of his truck smelled of older sweat and the metal tang of gasoline. He was tired, hands loose on the wheel, and the road was a black ribbon under the headlights. The radio died to static, and the desert pressed close on both sides, a flat world of low brush and the long, low shapes of mesas. He first noticed motion as a smear at the edge of the beam, like a dog running with its head down. The thing moved wrong, not bounding but sliding. Darren eased off the gas and the truck hummed softer. When the high beams hit it, the shape froze and turned. For a moment, the world narrowed to the creature's face reflected in glass, skin that looked too thin, a mouth that wasn't set right, and eyes that held a dull glare. The face was almost human, almost a man he might have seen at a bar 2 towns over, but the angles were too sharp, the skin too taut over bone. He felt a cold shiver run from his collar to his wrists. He hit the brakes hard enough to feel the truck dip. The creature stood on its hind limbs like a person, then straightened up and walked to the center of the road. Its arms were too long, its knees bent at odd angles. When it looked at him, it did not blink. It moved its head in a slow, deliberate way, like something testing a mask. Darren threw the truck into gear and peeled away. Gravel spat up behind them. For a few minutes, the only sound was the engine and the ragged breathing in his chest. Then he saw it again in the rear view, chasing, using long, actorish bounds that should have been clumsy, but were not. The thing closed ground like it knew how to hunt cars. The highway cut through open land, no easy places to hide. He drove until his palms cramped. At a gas station with one flickering light, the clerk looked at him with a blank stare, as if Darren had walked out of a fever dream. Darren's hands smelled like sour ash. On the hood, under a smear of dust, there were patches of blackened fine hair stuck to the paint like singed fur. He scrubbed at it, but the smell was sticky and deep. That night at a motel, the noise in the vents sounded like scratching, and a voice that tried to speak his name but came out wrong, metallic, like a radio with a loose wire. Neighbors later described a silhouette on the road the same week, seen by another driver, who swore the thing had run upright past his headlights like the legs were made of rope. The town started putting up warnings, not official, but a whisper. Do not stop on Highway 191 at night. The people who'd seen it said the creature imitated calls, someone you loved, someone who had once sat beside you, so you would open a door or slow down. Darren tried to explain to himself that stress and miles had warped his mind. When he went back months later to face that section of highway in daylight, the road looked normal, plain, like a strip of ribbon tied to nothing. Still, when he drove through at night again, he kept his windows up and the radio on a steady station, a bright human chatter to drown the wrongness. Once, at 2:13 a.m., the radio garbled, and a voice slid under the song, whispering his name. He did not answer. It learns the shape of people it wants you to trust. Story 2 is the sheep herder's fire. Thomas had spent nearly his whole life on that mesa, a thin man with hands like small folded tools who knew how to set a fence, read the weather by the cloud line, and coax stubborn sheep into a pen. He lived in a small shack that smelled of smoke and the musk of animal wool. The plains around his place were pale under moonlight, and the canyon far below was a black gap that swallowed sound. One evening in late September, after a storm had passed and the sky smelled clean, Thomas sat by his fire and patched a loose seam in a blanket. The sheep grazed in a scatter, their silhouettes low and round against the land. A ewe began to bleat in fitful bursts, a sound that snagged at Thomas's chest because it was short and raw, not the steady hum of animals. He took his lantern and walked out, leather soles soft on the packed earth. The light caught movement near the flock, more shadows than should have been there. Thomas counted eyes reflected in the lamp and realized there were more eyes than animals. In the beam crouched a shape that paused like an animal caught mid-motion. It had the back of a dog or coyote patched with torn hide, and on that hide something else lay, stitched hair, a false coat. The creature did not look up. Thomas called out in Navajo, a sound like a rolling stone, a way to say, "Get away clean and quick." The figure rose slowly. It took the shape of a man at first, then the outline wavered and became something else, all joints bending wrong. It wasn't wearing clothes. It wore skins nailed and seamed to a frame of bones and wire. The face that showed through was half a human face and half a mask of hide, the mouth trembling as if to form words it had learned by listening. Thomas heard a voice, a woman's voice coming from the thing. It used the cadence and the small pet names of people who had once lived near him. It called the name of a woman Thomas had loved and buried years before. The sound stabbed him because he had moved away, burying that grief in the labor of mending and counting, and now it had come back in the wrong mouth. He slammed his lantern down and ran to his door, bolting it with 2 deadbolts and a length of chain. The fire outside guttered under sudden wind. The creature paced the fence, tapping and whispering through the cracks, and then it sang, a crooked lullaby with the wrong words. All night, the sound circled his house, sometimes at the window, sometimes at his ear, like a thing learning how to mimic human sorrow. At dawn, he stepped out and found every sheep dead, their flanks torn and hung from posts. Hides were stripped clean and nailed up like flags. Some hides had been sewn together into crude, shrouded forms that crouched near the fence, staring into the light with empty sockets. The smell was hot and sour, metal and singed wool. He vomited and then went back in his house and packed a small bag, while the land was still pale with mourning. Over the next days, others came by. A friend with a pickup who refused to get out. Kids who told stories they had heard whispered at the feed store. Thomas's neighbor, an old woman, said no one should leave the dead to rot out here because things learn from what they find. They all said the same thing in different words. The creature had made skins to wear, skins that smelled almost like human. It tried on voices, and it learned to use them. Thomas left his house the way a man leaves a small altar, with one last look at the yard and the fence hung with unnatural flags. He moved into a town trailer where the walls were thin and filled with other people's sounds. At night, he still heard a voice that tried to fold itself into his name. Once he opened the window and heard, plain as you might hear a hawk, "You left the door open." He closed the window and never went back. It gathers what people leave and pretends it's alive. Our third story title is The Night at Red Mesa. Emily, Nate, and Jordan were friends since high school, the kind who could cram gear into a truck and be laughing at sunset. They set a small camp on a flat near Red Mesa, a place of high stone spires where the sky felt enormous. The air smelled of dust and old lightning. They brought a radio, a small stove, and a full pack of confidence. The stories about the area were local color to them, not warnings. They drank and told each other stupid stories until late. The fire smoldered and hollered, sending up fine ash. Around 2 in the morning, Jordan said he would go get more wood. He walked away into the dark, and the flame light slid along his jacket for a long moment, and then nothing. Emily and Nate laughed it off at first, expecting the usual return. When he didn't come back, they called his name. The desert swallowed the sound and nothing answered except a flat echo that sounded wrong. After a few minutes, a voice called from the scrub, a call for help with the right accent and the right humor. Jordan's voice, exactly, only pulled thin and distant, as if coming through a long corridor. It asked for help. Emily tightened the straps on her jacket and started toward the sound, and Nate, stiff and worrying, grabbed a flashlight and followed. The beam caught a figure that looked like Jordan, thin and pale and standing among low junipers. The figure's face was close enough to be familiar, but when it turned, the skin along the cheek slid like a loose glove. The mouth stretched where it shouldn't. The eyes looked too wide on the face, set far apart like an animal's. The figure moved fast then, not like a clumsy imitation, but with sudden bursts that had a human sense of balance and a decidedly inhuman reach. It ran toward them with a sound that was not quite a scream, layered with wrong echoes like a crowd trying to speak in one throat. Emily dropped her keys, scrambling back to the truck because the thing had learned to move like Jordan and to call like him, and it knew how to get someone close enough. They slammed into the cab and Nate twisted the key. The headlights cut the dark in a clean wedge, and for a second the thing stood in the beam, stretched thin and wrong, seams visible across the chest, patchwork where raw hide had been grafted to pale flesh. It made a sound that matched the town stories, many voices roiling together. Then it turned and vanished into the rocks. They drove with the radio on high, neither of them able to say what they felt beyond the prickling muscle of raw fear. Morning found little traces, an area of ground trampled in a ring, a patch of hide hanging from a low branch above the fire ring that was large and mottled. Not a single person's skin, but a gathered thing. There were footprints leading off in different directions, and a bare place where someone had been. They called the sheriff, who came and walked the edges, and looked and said only that there was no body and no sign of a person beyond the remnants. Word spread. The friends left the trip and came back with a team from town a few days later. More lights, more company. But the land had a different tone. Local trackers told them not to sleep on flat ground and warned them about imitations, how some things would come making sounds that were safe until they were not. Hunters in a nearby town said that sometimes these things followed highways and campgrounds, learning the rhythm of people. They learned to say help and friend and your name, and they use it to close the distance. Months after that night, Emily woke in her apartment certain she heard someone calling from the darkness of her hallway with a timbre like Jordan's laugh. She forced herself not to answer, and the sound faded. Nate moved away from the county line and told strangers he was moving to start anew. They all agreed never to go back to that patch of flat land at Red Mesa where the earth seemed to remember and keep making itself into skin. It practices voices until you can't tell the lie from the person. 3 nights, 3 different deserts, 3 ways something slipped between being human and being a thing, wearing humanity like a coat. They moved fast and they learned fast. They used the sounds people trusted and the scraps people left behind. If you ever hear someone call your name in the dark and it doesn't feel right, don't answer. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. If you like nights like this, like and subscribe to the Black Hour Stories for more. Good night. When a city like Los Angeles loses power, the darkness isn't empty. It's waiting. Here are 3 true horror tales from the night Los Angeles went dark. Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight, we're heading back to the night Los Angeles lost power. Millions thought it was just a blackout. But for some, the dark wasn't quiet, it was alive. 3 stories from that night prove that when the lights went out, something else turned on. Our first title is The Man in the Reflection. When the blackout hit Los Angeles, the first thing Alex Morales noticed wasn't the dark, it was the silence. His small Koreatown apartment had always buzzed with life. Traffic outside, someone arguing in the hallway, the steady hum of the refrigerator. But that night, everything died at once. The fridge stopped. The air conditioner stopped. Even the cars outside faded into nothing. It felt like the world had taken a deep breath and forgotten to let it out. Alex had been rinsing dishes, standing barefoot on cracked tile. His phone flashlight was balanced against a coffee mug, trembling with every vibration from the building's old pipes. When the power cut, he didn't panic. He just sighed, rinsed the soap from his hands, and told himself it'd be back soon. But after a few minutes, the quiet started to press in. He leaned on the counter, peering out the kitchen window. Usually he could see the faint orange glow of the city, but now it was all black. The street, the skyline, even the moon hidden behind the smog. His own reflection looked back at him from the glass, pale and tired under the weak light of his phone. Then he saw the faucet. The water had stopped midstream. He blinked, thinking it was his eyes adjusting to the dark, but the thin silver thread of water wasn't moving. It hung there, frozen in place like a photograph. Slowly it began to curve upward, bending back toward the spout. Alex backed away, one hand gripping the edge of the counter. The phone light flickered and the reflection in the window shifted, just a fraction of a second behind him, like a delayed video feed. He waved his hand. His reflection didn't move. The air turned colder. Not the kind of cold that came from the weather, a damp, stale chill that crawled up from the floor and settled in his bones. The reflection tilted its head, eyes still locked on his. He whispered, "No," though he didn't know what he meant by it. The reflection smiled, not a big grin, just the faintest twitch of the lips, but the way it stretched didn't look human. He grabbed the flashlight and aimed it at the window. The beam reflected right back, showing his own face, and behind it another outline, taller, thinner, standing right where he should have been but slightly offset, like someone sharing the same space but from a different angle. Something creaked. Alex spun around, heart hammering. The sound came from behind the wall, a slow dragging noise that moved from the kitchen to the living room. He thought about calling someone, but his phone had no signal. A single bar flickered, then vanished. The dragging stopped, then came a tap on the glass. 1, 2, 3. He swallowed hard and turned back toward the window. His reflection was gone, just black glass staring back. He raised the light again, and his own face flickered back into view. But his eyes were wrong. They were wide open, too wide, the whites shining like wet shells. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor, cracking the screen. The light died. Darkness rushed in. He could hear the faint hum again, not from the appliances, but from somewhere deeper beneath the floorboards, a vibration that made his ribs ache. He reached for the counter to steady himself and felt something touch his wrist. Cold, wet, human. He jerked away and stumbled into the wall. The touch lingered, a film of moisture on his skin that smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies. He rubbed at it, but it didn't fade. The tapping started again, faster now, from every window. He bolted for the door, tripping over the rug. His shoulder slammed into the wall, and he fumbled for the lock. As he twisted the handle, he heard whispering, not from outside, but from inside the apartment. It was low, rhythmic, impossible to understand, but the voice sounded like his own. He flung the door open and ran into the hallway. The emergency lights in the corridor were out. A few neighbors had stepped out, their faces pale in the glow of phone screens. Someone down the hall was crying. Another door slammed. The building felt heavier than usual, as if the blackout had weighed it down. Mrs. Ortiz, the old woman across from him, opened her door and called his name. She held a candle, the flame shaking from her trembling hands. She told him to come inside, to wait it out. He didn't argue. Her apartment smelled like incense and floor cleaner. She had small statues of saints lined along a shelf, all glowing faintly in the candlelight. She sat him down, poured him a glass of water, and whispered that nights like this were dangerous. La oscuridad se abre, she said. The darkness opens. He tried to laugh, to play it off, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He didn't tell her what he saw. She wouldn't believe him. They sat together until dawn. Every few minutes, he thought he heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and wet, like bare feet on linoleum. But when he looked, there was nothing. When the lights flickered back on, Mrs. Ortiz crossed herself. She said it was over. Alex wanted to believe her. He went back to his apartment, keys shaking in his hand. The air inside was damp, heavy with the same metallic smell. The towel he'd thrown over the window had fallen to the floor. He froze. Handprints covered the glass. Some were small, like a child's. Others were long, spidery, stretching almost to the ceiling. They were inside the glass, not on it, but within it, faintly distorted like air bubbles under ice. He packed his things in an hour. By sunrise, he was gone. Weeks later, he got a text from a number he didn't recognize. It was the new tenant. "Hey, sorry to bother you. Weird question. Did the kitchen window always have, like, layers? It looks like there's another reflection inside it. Moves when I move. Creepy Lowell." He didn't reply. He deleted the text and turned his phone face down. That night, as he lay awake in his new place, he caught his reflection in the TV screen, just a faint shape in the dark glass. For a moment, it seemed normal. Then it smiled. Our second title is The Freeway Walkers. When the lights went out across Los Angeles, the freeways became rivers of stalled cars. Engines died, radios went quiet, and drivers stepped out into a kind of darkness the city hadn't known in decades. Sergio Ruiz was one of them. He'd been driving home from his night shift at a food distribution center near Glendale, his old Honda Civic packed with the smell of diesel and sweat. It was a little after midnight when the headlights of every car on the 101 blinked once and vanished. At first, he thought it was his alternator, but when he coasted to a stop and saw that the entire city skyline had gone black, he knew it wasn't just him. The world had gone dark. He sat there for a few minutes, listening to people shouting and slamming car doors. Someone's hazard lights flickered weakly, then died. The freeway should have been noisy, chaotic, but it wasn't. The quiet spread like fog. Then came the smell, sharp and metallic like rain on hot pavement. Sergio stepped out of his car. The night air was warmer than it should have been, heavy with exhaust that wasn't moving anywhere. He tried his phone. No signal. The screen glowed uselessly against the dark. He wasn't the only one getting out. A few cars ahead, a woman called for someone named Ben. Farther back, a man was trying to flag down a tow truck that wasn't coming. But the longer Sergio stood there, the more he realized something was wrong with the shadows. They were moving. Not fast, not obvious. Just slow shapes walking along the shoulder of the freeway, maybe 50 yards away. He thought they were other people, maybe stranded drivers looking for an exit. But as they drew closer, he noticed how smooth their movements were. No shuffle, no bounce, just steady, gliding steps, like they were walking downhill, even though the freeway was flat. One of them crossed behind a stopped SUV. The man standing next to it shouted, "Hey!" and lifted his phone to see better. The light caught nothing. The shadow was gone. Then the man froze. Sergio couldn't see his face, but he saw the way the man's shoulders locked up, like he'd been touched by cold air. Something about that made Sergio get back into his car. He didn't shut the door. He just crouched inside, watching. The figures moved between the cars now. He counted 6, maybe more. They didn't make a sound. As one passed near a stalled pickup, its outline flickered, fading in and out like a reflection on rippling water. Someone started honking, maybe trying to scare them off. The sound was thin and desperate. The figures didn't react. Sergio ducked low, heart hammering. He could see them more clearly now under the faint starlight. They weren't naked or dressed, just shapes that looked like the memory of people, silhouettes with no detail. But when they turned their heads, he saw eyes. Not glowing, not bright, just dull and colorless like wet cement. One of them stopped beside a car 2 spaces ahead. A woman inside started screaming. Her interior light flicked on for a second, showing her clawing at her door handle. The figure leaned close, and the light flickered out. The scream stopped. Sergio wanted to run, but he couldn't make his legs move. Every part of him felt locked, heavy, as if the air had thickened. The smell of metal grew stronger, stinging his throat. Then something passed by his window. He didn't see it. He felt it first. A sudden drop in temperature, breath turning to mist. The glass beside him fogged up from the outside. Through the condensation, a faint handprint appeared. 5 fingers, long and thin, dragging downward. Sergio clenched his eyes shut and waited. Seconds or minutes passed, he couldn't tell. Then came the sound of feet moving away, soft, measured. When he opened his eyes, the figures were walking toward the overpass ahead. The cars in front of him were empty now, doors hanging open. He watched one figure reach the middle of the overpass and simply fade, gone, like smoke vanishing into a wind he couldn't feel. He waited there until the horizon began to gray with dawn. When the power came back, engines sputtered to life one by one. Drivers looked dazed, like they were waking from a dream. A few people stood in the road, asking where everyone else had gone. Dozens of cars were empty. No blood, no damage, just missing people. The police said it was panic, that folks had walked off the freeway to find help. CHP logged the event as a mass confusion incident, but Sergio knew better. He went back a few days later. He shouldn't have. It was early morning, light traffic. He parked near the same overpass and climbed up the embankment. The asphalt shimmered in the heat, and for a while it felt like any other stretch of highway. But near the center, where the figures had disappeared, he saw something strange. Long black streaks ran across the pavement like drag marks, but too smooth. No tire grooves, no footprints. Just straight lines leading from the middle of the road to the guardrail and stopping abruptly halfway across. He touched the surface. It was cold. That night, when he got home, he tried to forget. He told himself the darkness had played tricks on him, but around 3 a.m., when he went to the bathroom, he saw something outside his window. The streetlight across from his apartment flickered, dimmed, and went out. In the reflection of the glass, a shape stood behind him. Tall, grey, unmoving. He turned and there was nothing there. But when he looked back at the window, the reflection was still there, staring at him through eyes the color of old cement. Sergio stopped driving night shifts after that. He quit his job 2 weeks later and took a new one in Bakersfield, far from the city lights. Still, every few months he dreams of the freeway. The air heavy and still, the smell of metal and heat, dozens of cars sitting empty, their engines ticking softly. And in the dream, when he looks in the rearview mirror, they're there again, walking slowly up the lanes, gliding between the cars, eyes dull and endless. Sometimes he wakes up with the faint sound of footsteps echoing in his ears, fading just as the first light hits his window. Our third title is The Voice in the Hills. Tara rented the Laurel Canyon guest house because she wanted quiet. She wanted a place where she could write without the city leaning over her shoulder. The house sat back from the road on a slope of scrub and eucalyptus, a small wood frame with glass windows that looked out over the valley. In daylight, it felt like a secret. At night, it felt exposed. The power went out about 11:30. At first, it was a slow, careless dimming, then everything cut clean. Her little generator coughed and died. The house blinked into a kind of total dark that made the furniture disappear into a single soft mass. Tara lit a candle and sat with it on the kitchen table, the flame throwing soft shapes across a stack of printed pages. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink and coffee. Outside, the city went mute. She liked the silence at first. It let her hear things she never noticed. A distant train bell, a single insect chitter. But after a while, the quiet felt too tuned, like someone had reduced the world to a lower volume and left a single channel playing. There was a sound that did not belong to the neighborhood, a thin wavering hiss like an old radio between stations, and it seemed to be coming from down the slope, coming up through the ground. She stood and walked to the living room window. Moonlight filtered through the trees and flattened everything into grays. Between the trunks, something pale moved. Not a person, but a light. A soft, dying blue that wandered slowly along the path below. The blue didn't glow like a flashlight. It drifted like a phosphorescent smear. When it passed behind a trunk, the wood caught a faint after-image, as if the light had bent the air. The hiss turned into words, not English. The syllables tasted wrong in her ears, round and wet as if they were being spoken behind the surface of water. The sound threaded up the hill and into her ribs. She thought of a neighbor with an old ham radio, a weird late-night hobbyist. She told herself the voice belonged to a person and tried to close the window. The window fogged from the outside, as if someone had leaned close and breathed. She wiped at it with the heel of her hand. When she looked, breath pressed against the glass in a slow, patient rhythm. The fog organized itself into letters and then dissolved back into mist. For a moment she saw her name there, Tara, written backward and wet. The hair on her neck rose. She walked to the door and forced herself outside. The air pressed warm against her face, heavy with eucalyptus and something else, a metallic tang like nails left in the rain. The blue light had moved closer, a slow pulse between the trees. The voice came again, clearer now, each syllable thin and hungry. It repeated the same loop of sound, and somewhere inside the shape of it, she thought she could make out a cadence that matched her name. She walked down the path with bare feet, the damp earth cool beneath her soles. The light stayed ahead, never brighter, never farther away. Around the guest house, the shadows seemed thicker, like velvet curtains hung wrong. The radio hiss coalesced into a tone that felt almost like language. She stopped where the incline flattened by a dry creek bed and listened. The tone shifted when she stood still. A lower answer rose from deeper in the canyon. Not the same voice, but like it was speaking in reply. The new sound was slow and low, like something moving through gravel. For a moment the two voices braided, and then they fell into a synchronized pattern, as if two instruments had tuned to each other. Tara felt exposed and ridiculous. She pulled her phone from her pocket. The battery icon glowed pale, no bars. She tried the car. The engine turned and hiccuped, and then stilled like a throat clearing. Her hands shook harder than she expected. She told herself to breathe, to go back inside, to shut the door and lock it. The words felt small. The blue light drifted to the guest house side of the creek and paused. It hovered close to the ground, blinking like a dying LED. Beyond it, the canyon opened, black and layered. The answering voice rose again, this time clearer, and for the first time it articulated something that sounded like a syllable from her childhood, a nickname a cousin used once. It said it twice, and when it did, Tara's skin crawled because it sounded like a person had read a private line from her own mind. Panic came in a slow, methodical way. She turned and ran to the car. The keys trembled in her hand. The engine wouldn't catch. She tried again, and as the starter spun, a whisper came from the back seat. The same liquid voice, close enough to breathe. It said her name like a small promise, and then, as if tasting it, it repeated it softer, colder. The whisper didn't come from outside or from the trees. It came from inside the car, from the upholstery where no one sat. Tara slammed the car door and fled up the lane with bare feet, the candle forgotten on the table. She ran until the guest house was a rectangle of black against the sky, then kept running until the road bent and the trees broke her line of sight. Only when she reached the street, where a cluster of apartments still had emergency lights flickering, did she stop enough to breathe. The morning light came slow and thin, first a grey smear, then a pale blue, then the orange of the city bleeding back into the horizon. People emerged in groups, blinking, holding their phones like talismans. Power came back in stuttering bursts. Generators coughed and died. Radios filled the air with static and half-remembered songs. Tara went back once the crews had left and the traffic had thinned. A municipal worker told her there had been no record of anyone using a radio down the canyon, no unusual transmissions. He walked with her to the creek and frowned at the ground. Something had scorched the earth in a circle 5 feet across. The grass had curled away like paper burned near a flame. In the center, embedded in the blackened dirt, a transistor radio lay half melted, the plastic warped, dials fused to the soil as if it had been pressed down while red hot. She knelt, hands hovering over the relic. The radio was warm in a way that didn't belong to morning sun. Its label was worn away, and the casing had suffered a kind of glassy deformation, not from flame, but from pressure. When she touched it, the skin on her fingers prickled as if tiny electric charges were moving under the surface. Neighbors told stories later. Odd noises under the road, dogs whining at nothing, the old preacher from up the street saying he heard a voice like waves speaking in a language the Bible didn't have words for. A few claimed to be uneasy for weeks. A teenager posted a shaky video that showed a blue smear in the trees. The comments filled with jokes and conspiracy theories, and the usual morbid curiosity. Tara tried to forget. She tried to tell herself that a dead radio had been left by teenagers, or that cheap electronics sometimes heat and melt when trapped. But that evening in her apartment where she lived now, below the hum of a steady power grid, she woke to the sound of faint, wet syllables drifting up from the street outside. They were too low to be human, and they carried that same cadence she'd heard in the canyon. They repeated a soft, slow pattern, and somewhere in that pattern, she thought she heard her name. She would lie awake and imagine the light moving again between trees, patient as a tide. She imagined the radio buried and hot and dreaming, somehow connected to the canyon like a tooth left in the ground. Sometimes her phone alarm would fail to ring, and she'd wake with the taste of dust in her mouth, and the echo of that voice would hang under the hum of the refrigerator. Months later, a construction crew clearing a culvert below the guest house found a shallow depression where the earth had shifted. In the disturbed soil, they dug out another small object, charred plastic shaped like a dial. The foreman wrapped it in his jacket and left it by the truck. When he went to pick it up hours later, it was colder than morning air, and a smear of damp had settled into the weave of his sleeve where the object had touched his skin. He told his crew he felt like someone was standing very close but not moving, watching him breathe. Tara stopped going up to the canyon at night. She stopped answering calls from friends who wanted to visit and told the truth in small pieces. That something had called her name in a place where no one should have had a radio, that a blue light had walked the creek, that the earth had swallowed and kept a sound. She would not explain the things she felt at the back of her skull, a small battery of memory she could not shake. The sense that the voice had found its way to a frequency that cared for names. On nights the city dims and the hum of power drops, she still catches herself listening. In the absolute quiet, she sometimes hears a thin thread of static, a syllable that might be a name. She doesn't ask it to speak. She doesn't answer. After all, when something has learned your name by the sound of your childhood, saying nothing is itself a kind of safety. 3 stories from one long night when Los Angeles went dark. A man's reflection refused to follow him. Figures walked the dead freeways, and a voice rose from the canyon like something waking up. Some blackouts cut power. This one cut open the city. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever been caught in the dark when something started watching, like and subscribe for more from the Black Hour stories.